Morning, everybody. It's 7 o'clock coming up on the programme for you this Tuesday morning. The BBC facing growing calls to take MasterChef off air while an investigation is carried out into the presenter, Gregg with 2Gs Wallace.
Well, one former contestant told Sky News how he left her crying with humiliation. We'll ask Home Office Minister Jess Phillips what she thinks in the next few minutes.
And as Keir Starmer prepares to meet the Greek Prime Minister, we'll speak to our own national treasure, Stephen Fry, about why he thinks the Elgin marbles should be returned to Athens.
It's Tuesday, the 3rd of December. MasterChef host Gregg Wallace apologises for his comments about middle-class women of a certain age, but not for his conduct.
If it's just banter and it's fun, then why am I crying in the toilets?
Also ahead, Keir Starmer tells Ukraine to prepare for peace talks with Russia. The growing gender divide in British politics. We have a special report on what's pushing young men to the right. Redesigning a British icon, Jaguar unveils its new Barbie pink electric car.
Yay! It worked! Nervous moment there, but it's all good. Thank you very much.
And bringing some festive cheer, the Christmas lights go on at Downing Street. Morning, everybody. The BBC facing growing calls to take MasterChef off air while an investigation is carried out into the presenter Gregg Wallace. One former contestant told Sky News how he left her crying with humiliation. Mr. Wallace has since apologised for his comments over the weekend and says it's obvious he needs to take some time out now. Ashna Hurinag reports.
That chutney needs to be perfectly balanced if it's just going to be the two items on the plate.
By 2018, Jackie Kearney was a regular guest judge on the BBC's MasterChef. After first appearing on the show in 2011, she had worked with Gregg Wallace on several occasions.
You've got 10 minutes, Nisha.
OK.
We doing well?
Memories that up until now Jackie has only shared with friends. One stands out the most, after she had published her second book.
I was feeling really proud of it, and I wanted to give John and Gregg a copy of my book. And John, as ever, was a complete gentleman. Gregg was in the studio, and he was in the middle of the studio, in the middle of filming, actually having his makeup touched up. And there was crew everywhere, and he was mic'd up. I came into the studio and was like, "Oh, hi, Gregg. I've got something for you." And he said, "Oh, is it a present for my..." and gave that whole sort of mansplay towards me. And I was so shocked. I actually stopped. I was walking across the studio and I stopped right in my tracks. And I felt like I wanted the ground to swallow me up.
Jackie says she felt embarrassed and humiliated, and that time and again his actions were excused.
There is no way that other people haven't been hearing these innuendos constantly throughout filming and throughout his time, and that it's been put down to lad culture. It's been put down to banter. But banter doesn't make somebody... If it's just banter and it's fun, then why am I crying in the toilets?
Allegations against the presenter have been mounting for days. His defiant dismissal that his accusers were middle-class women of a certain age have been fiercely criticised, with Downing Street labelling them misogynistic. It didn't take long for yet another social media video, though, this time with an apology.
I want to apologise for any offence that I caused with my post yesterday and any upset I may have caused to a lot of people. I wasn't in a good headspace when I posted it. I've been under a huge amount of stress, a lot of emotion. I felt very alone, under siege yesterday when I posted it. It's obvious to me I need to take some time out now while this investigation is underway.
Stepping back after stepping down, whilst the investigation being led by the makers of MasterChef gets underway. Fellow chef Tom Kerridge knows Wallace well, on and off air.
yes, I know Gregg, and yes, I've always known him to have lots of, he's always full of jokes and he's always full of charisma, and that front of camera charisma is always something that continues into off screen as well.
As the union representing those working in media and entertainment slams broadcasters for their internal reporting processes, Banijay UK, the production company behind MasterChef, say they are taking these allegations seriously and that welfare processes are regularly updated and strengthened with clear protocols to support both crew and contributors. Despite calls for the programme to be temporarily scrapped, the BBC decided to air it, saying the show is about more than one individual, but that person just so happens to be one of its most famous faces.
Chefs, you've had 1 hour. You've got 45 minutes left.
Ashna Harinag, Sky News.
But how long does MasterChef have left?
That is the question. What the BBC is really facing this morning, Kay, are questions about why it aired MasterChef The Professionals last night amidst what is happening with regards to allegations about Gregg Wallace's behaviour. And secondly, I think it's facing questions about what it knew and when. Now, of course, it aired one of its programmes, MasterChef The Professionals, last night, and it said it will continue to air the planned episodes on Tuesdays and Thursdays as well. And a BBC spokesperson has said that the show is a life-changing opportunity for the chefs that take part. But we know that this is coming whilst there is an investigation by the production company that makes MasterChef, Banijay UK. They're investigating his alleged behaviour. Whilst this is happening, Downing Street has weighed into this and said the decision whether to pull an episode of any programme is down to the production company and down to the BBC. But last night, we've also heard from a senior Labour MP, Dr. Rupa Huck, who sits on the Culture, Media and Sport Committee, who says that pulling the show would send a strong message. This kind of behaviour is not acceptable. She suggested pausing it while this investigation takes place. But whilst this is all happening, there are questions for the BBC about what they knew and when. And we understand that they were aware of 2 complaints about his alleged behaviour in 2017 and 2018. The first relates to the Celebrity MasterChef programme in relation to the Times radio host Asma Mir. She complained to the production company, and also she complained to Kate Phillips, who is the BBC's head of unscripted factual TV. We understand that Kate Phillips was assured that something was being done about this at the time. She then received or was made aware of another complaint in relation to another programme he appeared on in 2018. And what happened as a result of that? She had a 90-minute conversation with Gregg Wallace about why his behaviour was not acceptable. Responding to all of this, a BBC source has said it would be wrong to report the BBC did nothing when matters were raised, and they say there were interventions and action was taken in 2017 and 2018. But I think whilst the programmes are continuing to be aired, the questions similarly, Kay, will continue as well.
So it's 2 big questions, isn't it, really? Yeah. I mean, I know Kate Phillips. She's a middle-class woman of a certain age. She takes no nonsense, and I'm sure she let him know in no uncertain terms what she thought about it. But it would appear that his behaviour has continued. So what happened between when she spoke to him then and now, and whether it's acceptable or whether it's triggering for women who are upset by his behaviour to see him on the telly.
Yeah, that's right. That's kind of the point, actually, that the Labour MP, Dr. Rupa Huck, was making, was saying that what does this do, what message does this send, really, to people who do make complaints? But I think, as you alluded to, it points to perhaps a wider question as to how do broadcasters deal with their talent, perhaps when allegations of this nature are made. What happens when there are pre-recorded programmes? Because, of course, MasterChef The Professionals has already been recorded. It is planned for Christmas as well. It's quite a big programme, especially around the festive period for the BBC. So what will happen then is yet to be seen.
Thoughts on the apology?
Thoughts on the apology?
No, it's fine. It's fine. I'm sorry if you were upset.
I think we'll let people decide how they feel about that, Kay.
OK, thanks very much. Thank you. In other news this morning, Sir Keir Starmer has given the strongest hint yet that he expects there to be a negotiated peace between Ukraine and Russia. The Prime Minister was speaking at the Lord Mayor's banquet in London, where he set out what Ukraine's allies need to do ahead of any potential peace talks with Russia's President Putin.
We must continue to back Ukraine and do what it takes to support their self-defence for as long as it takes, to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position for negotiations so that they can secure a just and lasting peace on their terms that guarantees their security, independence, and the right to choose their future.
Now, when you think Jaguar, do you think Barbie pink? The motor company has unveiled its new electric car. Good morning.
Yeah, new electric car. I don't know if you can see a picture of it on the screen,
sure.
but it's not what you typically think of when you think of a Jaguar. Nevertheless, it has got aspects of the old Jaguar in there. It's got the long bonnet. It sits pretty low, which is unusual for an electric vehicle, but it's probably not what you're going to see parked outside a golf club in Surrey anytime soon. But this is the British car maker's efforts to revive the brand, which has been struggling. It's struggling to stay profitable. Sales have been dwindling. It's trying to embrace the future. It's promised it's going to go fully electric by 2026. This is its efforts to do it. It's a fully electric vehicle. And as part of that, it has to try and embrace new customers. And Jaguar is saying it's going for a new international wealthy market. But its plans to do that have frustrated, some will say, have frustrated its traditional customer base. It released an advert last month, a 30-second teaser where it had lots of diverse models in brightly coloured clothes, jumping around. That actually created a bit of a stink online. Some people were saying it's abandoning the customers who are more used to seeing sort of a British actor like Tom Hiddleston in a sharp suit behind a car in Jaguar adverts. And Elon Musk, surprise, surprise, owner of another big car maker, Tesla, had thoughts about it. He tweeted saying, do you sell cars on X, which he owns? And the likes of Nigel Farage also chipped in, criticising the brand for embracing diversity.
I'm sure they'd be gutted about that.
Well, yeah, because a lot of people had views about the Jaguar who are never going to buy it, who've never owned a car and who will never will own the car because...
What's happened to the Jaguar motif?
Yeah, so it's changed it. So they've got the leopard is moved, so it's sideways, it's now front-facing. The company's saying it's embracing the future, it's forward-looking. And they've also changed the font of Jaguar, so they've moved the G and the U so that it's balanced and proportionate. A lot of marketing speak in there. But
I got that.
There's a lot of that in there. But it's an unusual car. It looks different. But as I was saying, at £100,000, most people won't be buying it.
No, it looks like, especially the pink one, it looks like Lady Penelope's car out of Wacky Races.
That has been observed.
Oh,
actually.
has it?
Yeah,
oh, okay.
yeah. You're not the first person to
now.
have said that. Yeah, people have noticed that. Which one do you prefer, the blue one or the pink one?
Neither. I think they're terrible. Terrible. I would never drive one of those vehicles. But then they're not aimed at me, are they?
No, no.
So let's see. What do you think? Perhaps you could let us know. You can tweet us directly if you would like to, at Kay Burley. Rest of today's news now. Here's Gareth.
Yes, we're going to start with the Middle East. That's because the ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah looks increasingly fragile. There was a limited exchange of fire between the two sides yesterday. Israel launched airstrikes on southern Lebanon after Hezbollah attacked a watchtower with rockets. The Emir of Qatar begins a state visit to the UK today, hosted by King Charles. The King will welcome Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani at a ceremony in Whitehall as part of the two-day trip. Queen Camilla will miss the occasion as she recovers from a chest infection, but will join later for a private lunch. The French Prime Minister Michel Barnier is facing a vote of no confidence this week. Mr Barnier is under fire after he pushed through a contentious budget without parliamentary approval. French politics has been fractured since June, when snap elections delivered no clear majority. The Vietnamese property tycoon Truong My Lan has lost her appeal against a death sentence for masterminding the world's biggest bank fraud. In April, the 68-year-old was convicted of embezzling the equivalent of £9 billion. Vietnamese law states if she can pay back 75%, her sentence will be commuted to life imprisonment. Downing Street says that the return of the Elgin marbles to Greece will not be on Sir Keir Starmer's agenda when he meets with the Greek Prime Minister later this morning. But reports say the British Museum could be close to reaching a deal. The sculptures were removed from Athens by Lord Elgin in the 19th century and have been displayed at the museum for over 200 years. Well, at 7:30, Kay will be joined by the actor and writer Stephen Fry, who's among those calling for the marbles to be sent back to Greece.
Nigel Farage managed to persuade more than 4 million people to vote reform at the last general election, and lots of them apparently were young men. Our political correspondent Serena Barker-Singh reports.
Reform UK had the most online engagement of any party this election.
TikTok was the place where I saw them, that's where they sort of made the name for themselves, especially Nigel.
And who was watching? Well, mostly young men.
Young blokes want to be young blokes, and they feel the world is telling them not to be young blokes. Something remarkable is happening with Gen Z.
Data from the general election shows a growing gulf between how young men and women are voting. The so-called bro vote is on the rise, with young men twice as likely to have voted reform in the election than young women. And for 16 to 17-year-olds, 35% of young men said they would have voted reform, making Farage's party as popular with this demographic as Labour.
Hey guys, look again. The conference hasn't...
Nick became a political influencer after his first TikTok supporting reform went viral overnight.
It is young people, but it's also young boys, young men.
Yes.
What do you think it is about reform that attracts that demographic?
I think with the onset of fourth-wave feminism and all of that, I for one believe that young men are feeling increasingly disenfranchised by society.
Hello, my name is George Finch. I'm 18 years old.
George Finch started a reform-focused magazine online. He says it's by reformers for reformers.
All of us have got that one common goal, and it's to get reform to win.
You want as many voters to vote for you as possible.
Yeah.
So if you see it skewed so heavily in one way, surely you want to make sure as many people are voting.
Sure if you see this as a significant issue for reform, I'm sure HQ are solving this.
This is Charlie. He spent the summer campaigning for Reform UK on a battle bus with Nigel Farage.
We stand here united!
But 3 months later, now at just 13 years old, he's moved further to the right, attending and speaking at Tommy Robinson rallies.
I've got an opinion on immigration and stuff like that. Obviously, stop the votes and all that kind of stuff.
Do you think from the summer to now you've spent more time online?
Yes, and I believe me being online has helped me actually develop my views. Because if I, say for example, if I were to just watch a normal TV, I would say, oh, what a racist person he is, what a racist person they are. But no, now I'm on Twitter, I see it all firsthand.
And increasing numbers do seem to be listening. An anti-establishment rhetoric now filling a political gap that mainstream politics won't. Serena Barker-Singh, Sky News.
Jess Phillips joining us for the government this morning. Lots to talk about, Ms Phillips, but let's just start with that. Should we, 16 to 17-year-old men, boys, if they were allowed to vote this time, 35% of them would have voted reform. Thoughts on that?
I mean, I'm the mother of two children in that category, or men, sorry, I should refer to one of them as. And look, we shouldn't ever ignore any group of voters or potential voters, and if young men for some reason feel like that they're not being represented by the main parties, then that's something that we have to look into.
Can you tell us, you want to talk about stalking today, of course, tell us what you're planning to do to tackle stalking? You've had your own experience of it, of course.
Yeah, so the government is today announcing a series of 6 new measures to ensure that stalking victims are handled better by policing and other agencies. One of those things that we're announcing today is the right to know. So currently there is a mixed picture across the country of whether police forces tell victims specifically of online anonymous stalking or other forms of anonymous stalking where they don't know who their stalker is. Lots of stalking happens within post-domestic abuse situations. But for those who are stalked by a stranger, currently the police can withhold that information, and the case came after Nicola Thorpe, who was on Coronation Street. This happened to her, and she was told she couldn't know the identity of her stalker. So we will give people like Nicola and other victims the right to know. We were also going to look at the legislation to see if currently the stalking legislation, sort of not really updated since 2012, is fit for purpose, because what stalking victims and the stalking support agencies tell us by putting in a super complaint about how stalking cases are handled is that currently the framework isn't working as well as it could. We're also going to advance and look to improve stalking protection orders so that courts can ensure that on conviction, for example, at court of stalking, you could have an order put in place so that people couldn't stalk you from prison, which doesn't seem like a thing that could happen, but is a thing that literally happened to me.
I believe so. Nicola Thorpe will be on the programme later on, the actress that you mentioned there. What about cutting off internet access to stalkers? Would that be possible? Would that be something that you would look at?
Well, look, the measures that we're announcing today don't include cutting the internet off. I mean, sometimes, you know, going back to being the mother of two teenage boys, maybe I'd like to turn the internet off completely. But I think that I'm not going to get the government backing for that, Kay. But look, there are orders. So, for example, sexual harm protection orders, or those people who are on the sex offenders register. There are ways that law enforcement can limit their access to online. That wouldn't be the case in these circumstances. But this raft of measures we're announcing today is just the sort of first raft, the first steps really to trying to improve this situation. And we will speak, it's not something that was demanded, I have to say, by the stalking victims or the stalking agencies in the complaints that they put in 2022, which has led to many of these changes. But look, you know, I'm always looking for ways to stop people being able to abuse men. But yeah, it's certainly not something we're considering at the moment.
Are you satisfied with Gregg Wallace's apology?
I think that Gregg Wallace should maybe take a moment to reflect and think about what he says before he says it. My mother used to advise me that I'd missed the perfect opportunity to say nothing, and I think that maybe he should take that advice for a short while. It's very easy to come out and say sorry after you've had a bad reaction to something, but look, these are serious allegations. They are being investigated. I should imagine he would have been better off if he'd just taken part in that investigation.
Should the BBC pull the shows? Some suggestions that it can be potentially triggering. In fact, one of your MP colleagues said it could be triggering for women who've been impacted by his behaviour.
Look, what I would feel very sad about, it's not for me to make up, you know, what the BBC puts on, because I'm not sure that the British public would tolerate what I might schedule all the time. But the fact of the matter is that Gregg Wallace is just one part of that show, and I would feel a bit sad for certainly the young chefs who are getting their big break by being on that TV programme. And I've met some of previous winners from previous years, and it's a real boost for them. And people love it. Look, it's not for me to say whether it should be on or it shouldn't, but it would. I think it's bigger than Gregg Wallace, isn't it? I mean, I remember when Lloyd Grossman presented it.
So do I. But, you know, he's not been accused of some of the stuff that Gregg Wallace has been accused of.
No, I wouldn't like to accuse him of anything.
Yeah, indeed. So, former MasterChef contestant told Sky News that Gregg Wallace made innuendos constantly, and one sexually inappropriate comment left her in tears in the loo. What does the BBC need to do to make sure that that sort of behaviour is not acceptable? We're told that he'd been talked to at least twice by the woman in charge of non-scripted at the BBC, and it looks as though he carried on with his behaviour allegedly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that some of the complications come from this as well, because it's a private production company, isn't it, that I think sells the content to the BBC. But look, the culture secretary, Lisa Nandy, has spoken with the Director General at the BBC, and the BBC is undertaking like a general cultural review into their practices. But if people, the trouble always comes, it seems to me, in cases when these cases come out. of varying degrees of severity, is that telling somebody repeatedly and then repeated complaints coming in is that what you have to really look for is whether the balance of power, whether the talent, as I believe people get called in the world of telly, if having them overrides the safeguarding, and that is something that I think should never be the case.
Let me ask you about a story on the front page of many of the papers today. Can you give us any more clarity on the government's position on as it relates to the United States as opposed to the EU, Brussels? If I'm looking at one paper, it tells me that we're going to be closer to the US. If I'm looking at a front page of another paper, we'll have a look at them, it tells me that we're going to be closer to Brussels. And if I look at a third paper, it tells me that you're going to be close to both of them. So what's the situation?
I think, to paraphrase the Prime Minister, we can chew and walk at the same time. There's absolutely no reason why we should have to... the United Kingdom wouldn't have alliances with both Europe and the US, and actually sort of pre-guessing what a Donald Trump administration is going to look like is it seems slightly like folly to me. And the United Kingdom has alliances with both the European Union. They are literally our closest ally, and the United States is our strongest ally. We've managed for, well, all of my life and most of those watching to have alliances with both. I'm sure that will be able to be maintained.
What are we going to do about the Elgin marbles?
Oh, gosh, do you know what, Kay? I don't know what we're going to do about the Elgin marbles.
What would you like to happen?
I didn't know it
do you
would
think
come
we should
up
keep
again.
them here? The Prime Minister...
Oh, gosh, it's like a raging debate in my house with my husband, the Elgin marbles.
It's certainly a raging debate as it relates to... Let me finish, if I may, please. The Greek Prime Minister and our Prime Minister are meeting today. They want them back. We pinched them a long time ago. What should we do?
Look, I think that there's probably a perfectly sensible solution that can become up. I'm not going to preempt the conversation that the Prime Minister is going to have with the Greek Prime Minister, because that would then become the story of me telling Keir Starmer what to say to the Greek Prime Minister. But look, it seems like that two friendly nations could probably get over this this particular issue. And I have to say, in the public, it's very rarely raised with me on a doorstep what's going to happen to the Elgin marbles, notwithstanding my husband's keen interest in it.
OK, Jess Phillips, lost for words. I'm going to put that on my CV. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, as usual. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you, Stephen Fry will be here. He's got a view on the Elgin marbles. We'll bring it to you very shortly. He's sorry. But for what exactly? We'll ask an expert in crisis PR what they thought of MasterChef host Gregg Wallace's apology.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
An enormous explosion that's just come down. I think it was a monster's just landed in between us.
Hundreds and hundreds of people hoping to get north, ultimately to get to the United States.
It's a border where they're not welcome, and yet they keep coming.
We saw snatch squads going in, grabbing people, taking them out and putting them into trucks, but taking them away.
They make about 50 kilos of fentanyl a week. It's incredibly dangerous and toxic stuff.
There's been an upsurge in deaths. The fighting between the gangs is getting more and more vicious.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah.
The battlefield is outside the barricades, which is over there. This is much more like a normal town. It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change. We've been crushed.
Free from wherever you get your news. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive.
This is real, hardcore emergency medicine.
The information on this could bring down the entire network, not just in Iraq and Syria, but across the world.
Sky News, the full story first. Hundreds of thousands of people have been using the beast for years to traverse Mexico, but it is really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. Jess Phillips doesn't have a view on the Elgin marbles, but Stephen Fry does, and he's going to share it with us right now. Good morning to you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, yes.
That's good. Tell me about your view on the Elgin marbles. Do you call them that?
No, I tend to call them the Parthenon marbles. I think the piratical earl who lifted them out of Greece over 200 years ago probably doesn't deserve to have his name connected with them. But on a more serious note, yes, I have been dedicated, if that's the right word, to the mission of seeing if the marbles can be repatriated and placed where they belong back in Athens. I know there are have been all kinds of claims and counterclaims of legality and things that are, you know, that deaccession, as they call it, the loss of an article is very difficult for a museum, and that there's an Act of Parliament and so on. But all of this can be overcome by willpower, and indeed Acts of Parliament in the past have meant that the Australian Constitution, the actual Constitution, the document, was in the British Museum, and an Act of Parliament had to be passed to return it, or give it to the country where it belonged, in Canberra, and it was like 5 minutes on the nod. These things are not impossible. And in a way, the comedy of it is it's so human, it's all down really to language. I suspect that what Kyrie Mitsotakis, the Greek Prime Minister who's visiting at the moment, and Sakir will be perhaps skirting around if they are talking about the subject, is the language. And that's the key. In a sense, it's a four-letter word, L-O-A-N. The British Museum wants it known that they are perhaps going to lend the marbles to Greece. And for Greece, that's really not an acceptable word because it's not accepting that they belong to Athens and to the Greek people.
Yeah, so the view is that, my understanding is that the British Museum are not in a position as we speak this morning to be able to return the marbles, but they could return them on a permanent loan, and that is not acceptable to the Greeks. Is that right?
Well, I can't speak for either Greece or the British Museum, obviously, but that seems to be the tension in the argument, the thing that may be holding back an equitable agreement that will be good for both sides, because there'll be exchanges and there'll be, you know, it's a partnership, it's a collaboration. If they could change the wording, if the marbles were in the, you know, the new Parthenon Museum, the Acropolis Museum in Athens, they could say by arrangement with, in collaboration with the British Museum or something like that. Would that be acceptable? It really comes down, in a sense, think of all those apparently highly educated figures who are the diplomats in the Foreign Office and elsewhere in the civil service who pass the highest exams to get there. It's, can they find a form of words, is in a sense the question. And I hope they can, because pride on both sides will actually not be reduced or compromised, but increased for the Greeks, obviously, to have the unification of these fantastically sacred and important pieces. And for Britain, our reputation, I think it will enhance it. We will seem to have done something rather classy. And I think, you know, it's not a slippery slope argument. Everyone recognizes the very special quality of the Parthenon and the history of the marbles and the move to Britain, and then we hope they're moved back home.
You are part of the Parthenon project, and you believe a cultural exchange is the solution. Do you accept that Lord Elgin did get permission to originally remove the marbles?
It's a separate argument either way, but there is no evidence that he did. This document called a firman, which is a document of permission from the Ottoman Empire, who ruled that part of Greece and occupied it, apparently gave a document to him. It's never been seen. There is no record in the archives of the Sublime Porte, as the government of the Ottoman Empire is called. But even if he did, it's a bit like saying, you know, I was in Paris in 1942 and the Germans sold me the Arc de Triomphe and gave me a document to say it was mine. Well, then after the liberation of Paris, I think the Parisians might say, hang on, that was an occupation by an empire, a Reich, and they had no business selling you just because they had occupied it. And that was the position in Athens. The Ottoman Empire had occupied Greece, and they apparently gave permission. As I say, there's no evidence they did. But even if they did, by what right could they give away the property of a sovereign nation and people like the Greeks, in reference to their Athenian Empire, to which we all owe so much?
Do you feel that we are closer now, Stephen, than ever before to the marbles being returned or taken to, whichever word you choose to use, to Greece?
Yes, I do. I believe, I have no reason to disbelieve, that Sir Keir Starmer is more sympathetic to the idea. Obviously, his lawyer's mind will want the framing and everything else to be clear and for there not to be set a precedent as far as he can see it. And I believe also that Lisa Nandy, in charge of the Culture, Media and Sport Department, is more sympathetic than previous tenants of those offices, I believe. And I also know that, as Jess said, it's not a doorstep matter when people are canvassing for, you know, political votes. On the other hand, when there are polls on the subject, the British people, by a majority, think that it's a smart and honourable thing to return these after 200 years.
Given that you are such an eminent guest, it would be remiss of me not just to ask you about the scandal engulfing MasterChef. I know you were on it, but not when Gregg Wallace was. I wanted to ask you more broadly, though, about the culture of British broadcasting and the entertainment industry as it stands today.
Well, it's a sort of collision of generations and attitudes that makes a very ugly noise when they bang together. And, you know, the whole thing is most unfortunate. There's a kind of wry comedy almost in watching the mainstream media, as we like to call them these days, the rather right-wing press, which generally speaking promotes and pushes an anti-woke agenda in which they bemoan, oh, can't you tell any jokes anymore these days? They're constantly going, but they have to balance that against their hatred of the BBC, and their hatred of the BBC trumps their hatred of wokeness. So you've had this rather bizarre spectacle in Fleet Street, as we used to call it. But on a more serious note, it was obviously unbelievably foolish of Gregg Wallace to make that video over the weekend. It really showed that he simply wasn't understanding. And, you know, even if he felt that he'd been misunderstood himself, he could surely see that there were some women there who were truly hurt and had felt not listened to, and that he should first of all address that. But, you know, who knows? He's now probably being rightly, I suppose, advised by lawyers. Yes, I don't know him. I met him once. We were both guests at a cricket match, and that was, you know, just paying attention to what was going on the green. But yeah, it's obviously some sort of pressure has built up, and now it's once it starts getting out, as is the way of the media, as we know, once a story gathers momentum, it gallops and gallops faster and faster. But I think if by now people who work in television, men who work in television, don't understand that light banter is no longer something that can be aired in ways unless they're thinking hard about, is there a sort of victim or a stereotype at the root of this banter who might be hurt? And it's just good manners, really. It's good manners have changed. In Victorian time, it was, certain things couldn't be referred to or seen, and it was only polite to obey this because people were sort of shocked and upset if things were not respected, that they respect. And so I think we've all just got to realize it's not about wokeness. It's just about being sensitive to the atmosphere. If you're having tea with your aunt, you don't turn up wearing shorts and a T-shirt, scratching yourself and filling the air with lots of filthy language. Your aunt wouldn't appreciate it. But when you're with your friends down the pub, you might. It's as simple as that. You've just got to be, people have to be more attuned to the world in which they live. And I mean, surely we evolved to respect the boundaries and the hierarchies of our kith. And that's sort of all that's being asked. And for some, it isn't easy. And so the result is a resounding mess.
Do you have, it sounds as though you potentially have a little bit of sympathy for him, that he was misunderstood?
Well, no. No. I'm not going to say that exactly. I have sympathy for anybody whose life is just suddenly becomes a mess. I can sort of picture myself in that situation and think, oh, my Lord. But I don't think that I'm excusing him or saying that he wasn't obviously a boor, a crashing boor, in both senses, a boorish behaviour and a bore. And, that's not the way to behave on film sets and TV sets and things. You've got to be just one of the bunch.
It's always an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I'm sure you've made the day for so many of our viewers this morning. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the program.
Thank you very much. Lovely talking to you.
And you too. Thank you. Bye-bye. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you, a former MasterChef contestant tells Sky News that Gregg Wallace left her in tears after an explicit, sexually inappropriate comment.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
If there's anyone who might know how to fix Northern Ireland's devolved government, it's the American architect.
Changes in circumstance require changes in approach.
The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland.
I confirmed that I am willing to take up the office of First Minister. My election to the post of First Minister demonstrates the change that's happening on this island.
Catholics and Protestants on different sides, now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19 and end up in hospital, religion's nothing.
People here are adept at finding hope amid adversity. That's the spirit of a place that punches way above its weight. We help you understand the world with us. A toxic blue-green algae now poisoning Loch Ness. It's breaking your heart what has happened here.
It is.
This is a vital resource, a national treasure, now fighting for its very life. They are effectively surrounded by Northern Ireland, and that makes this the most unlikely of international frontiers.
If there's a hard border, I think it'll cripple the country.
Winter is coming. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. Sky News, the full story first.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people. at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
The most significant day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Why only in America? People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want
you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. We have been talking about Gregg Wallace, those comments that he made about middle-class women of a certain age complaining about his behaviour, and then he had to row back again on Instagram yesterday. He's now unfollowed his co-presenter, and it's all just a mess. Gito Harry, who used to look after Boris Johnson at 10 Downing Street, is with us now. It's good to see you, Gito. Thanks for joining us. What did he do right? I was initially going to say, what did he do wrong? But what's he done right over the last few days?
Do you know what? If he'd missed out that bit in the middle where he just attacked his detractors, his victims, if you liked, and cut straight to what he tried to do last night, which is show a little humility, an apology, it would have landed pretty well. Unfortunately, what happened in the middle made his situation a lot worse, because I think the jury was slightly out on what may or may not have happened a long time ago. It wasn't looking good, but it wasn't fatal. But I think when he did his rant the other night on Instagram, it turned a sort of grey area into a very, very bad place for him.
What does he do now?
Well, he's tried now to do what he should have done in the first place, shown a little humility. Some would say not enough. I think it's certainly changed the tone, if you like. It's shown that he gets how much offence he has caused. And now he's got to just hope that that actually trumps what happened the night before, and it's largely, of course, in the hands of the BBC at this stage.
You were also very senior BBC personnel. I suppose some might say, why does this keep happening to them?
It's weird, isn't it, Kate? Because when I was at the BBC, I was extremely conscious, literally every day for 18 years, that you have an immense privilege to be in people's living rooms or, you know, on their car radios or wherever they sort of encounter you, and that they have to pay for you to be there through the TV license. So it's an enormous privilege to be a BBC person with access to that kind of audience, and you've got to take that very seriously. And clearly, what has happened with a number of figures now is that they somehow forget the sort of responsibility that comes with that sort of right and with that sort of privilege. And in the case of him, you know, however we categorize the behavior, he's clearly offended and upset a lot of people over the years. And, you know, that's food for thought, and how the BBC allows people, if you like, to almost become bigger than them, bigger than the platform, bigger than the sort of role that they have, and become to a point where the management of the BBC don't feel they can actually manage those people, because the talent in the end is more powerful than the management.
Interesting, I don't know if you heard Stephen Fry on the show just before you, just on the side of the break, and he was talking about this story, and he was talking about the in his words, anti-woke media who found themselves in such a difficult position because they hate the BBC even more.
It is a dilemma for them, isn't it? But I think it's, you know, there are areas in life where I think we can be oversensitive. And sometimes when we revisit the past through the lens of the present, that often portrays things that did not feel as blatantly wrong at the time, you know, in an unfair light, if you like. But on this occasion, and that's why, back to where we started, what he did on Sunday night was almost worse than whatever allegedly happened over the years, because he basically shown that he was quite happy to poke his victim in the eye and sort of raise two fingers to, you know, anyone who's, you know, bold enough to criticize him.
Can you see him coming back from this?
Well, it was quite interesting, and I think the BBC was right in the end not to sort of pull the show, because, you know, much as they may want to sort of rein him in, the contestants, of course, would be absolutely devastated if this big moment that is important to a lot of them and their their day-to-day careers, if you like, as chef, was actually, pulled. So you punish them, actually, for what happened to him. So I think they've probably made the right call there. It's just one of those to just keep a bit more of a grip and not overreact either, because we don't want to get to a point where nobody can actually say anything remotely risque. There's all kinds of innuendos with cooking all the time, but this is not innuendo as far as I can tell with him. It's stuff that has just upset people.
I can see the argument for keeping MasterChef the professionals. As you said, it could make a huge difference to people's lives. What about MasterChef, the Christmas specials? Is that a halfway house? Could the BBC be seen to be doing something by pulling that?
I don't know. Does it actually appease people who've been offended in the past? I'm not aware that anyone who took who's due to take part in the Christmas special or would be among them. So it feels a bit like a sort of gesture to me that doesn't really do anything to satisfy those who have a grievance. What they do need to do is decide whether they keep him going forwards, and if he does, he sort of does a slightly more elaborate mea culpa, if you like, and watches how he behaves going forwards. Yes, he can still be funny. Yes, he can even be a little bit risque, but some of the stuff I've just been reading about now, it's not sort of risque. It just annoyed people and upset them.
Yeah, I mean, some of the girl that we had on the show, some of the stuff he was saying to her, I mean, he should be embarrassed, ashamed of himself. Anyway, let's see what happens going forward. Before you go, though, I do want to ask you about the fact that President Trump will be back in the White House come January. Do you think that you might find yourself back at number 10 Downing Street with your old boss in the future?
Well, I doubt that very much at the moment. I think it's extremely unlikely. But, Donald Trump has shown that, the establishment can throw everything at him and he can still, get back. Key difference, Kay, as you know, is that it's a direct election for the US president where, you can cut out the people in between. We have a parliamentary democracy, so there's no way back for Boris Johnson unless the Conservative Party accept him. And I think that's a very, very long shot.
Hey, they said that about President Trump. Let's see what happens. It's always great to see you. Thanks very much indeed, Guito. Thank you.
All the best.
You too. Hi.
Hi.
Morning. Lots to talk about, including the Elgin or Parthenon marbles, what's going to happen as far as those are concerned, the Prime Minister and the Greek Prime Minister talking about that today, even if Jess Phillips isn't around her coffee table. And also Gregg Wallace, the MPs and Prime Minister has got involved with that too.
Yeah, absolutely. The PM spokesperson yesterday commented on Gregg Wallace's comments and kind of Instagram rant about women of a middle-class women of a certain age, and said it was, misogynistic and inappropriate. And then since then, obviously, Gregg Wallace then came out, apologised clearly, embarrassed by the backlash. But Jess Phillips this morning, when you were asking her about this, she was quite sceptical about that apology, and she basically said, it's quite easy to apologise after there's been a big backlash rather than kind of doing it off your own back, essentially. So I didn't feel like she was fully convinced that he was apologising necessarily for the right reasons. And also, she was questioning the balance of power at the BBC when you were asking her about whether the BBC had some work to do, maybe some soul-searching to do. And she was very keen to say, actually, we need to look at whether the talent and the focus on talent is overriding safeguarding for those who are working at the BBC. And that's something that she said she wants to kind of know more about, essentially. So I think it sounds like the government are quite keen to hear more from the BBC about exactly how they've been working, exactly what has and has not been done when it comes to safeguarding. Obviously, that's her brief as a Home Office Minister, and also, therefore, whether it's actually a safe and reasonably good place to work, considering that so many people pay their licence fee for the BBC. And really interesting, Stephen Fry's comments as well about the BBC.
I thought so, yeah, and the fact that he was talking about the anti-woke media, in his words, saying they were in such a struggle because they hate the BBC even more than they hate anti-wokeness.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, Stephen Fry was clearly kind of trying to say that actually he feels that there's potentially some difficulty in the media in the way that they judge, represent or talk about or attack, depending on how you want to view it, the BBC, and that's potentially skewing the way that people feel about the BBC and look at the BBC. He seemed quite sympathetic to the BBC and the BBC's position, really. Maybe understandably so, having worked, obviously, on the BBC so much. But it was quite interesting to see his views on that and the way that he thinks things have been potentially skewed as well in the media. Yeah.
OK, for now, thanks. Let's talk about the Christmas tree lights at Downing Street, switched on last night.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yay! It worked. Nervous moment there, but it's all good.
If our exec producer counted backwards as slowly as he did, we'd be crashing off air, wouldn't we?
Yeah, it was a slow count, wasn't it, Kay? Very slow count. Slightly painful.
Yeah, but it is the tradition. Does this mean that you can now have your tree?
I hope so. I'm waiting for it, Kay. I'm waiting.
Every morning you come in, you look at me and go, it's still not here, still not here, still not here.
I know.
Okay. Yeah, well, let's see. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to be talking to Mel Stride. I wonder what he's going to be saying about the BBC.
I know. I mean, he's Tory, so generally we expect them to be slightly more critical of the BBC, but we'll see whether he's trying to be balanced or not.
I think the point, though, that's been made before is that challenge because of the production companies and the BBC and the kind of the degrees of separation. But we know this wider review of the BBC is going on. We know that they're looking at the protocols and processes, and we also know this is not the first time that BBC's had these kind of issues, has it? So I'm sure there'll be points that he will try and put across, surely.
Presumably. It's difficult for the BBC because, like you say, then you've got that kind of different companies working at the same time. But at the end of the day, that's how TV works, so you need to find a way to make sure that you keep people safe.
Very true.
And that shouldn't necessarily be an excuse.
Yeah, but let's not forget, it's a sensational organisation that gives us brilliant movies and goodness knows what else, television leading up to Christmas, as does Sky.
Yes.
So we'll talk about it, though, throughout the course of the programme here. On Sky News Breakfast, do stay tuned for more.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Morning, everybody. It's 8 o'clock coming up on the programme for you. A foolish move. The actor and writer Stephen Fry tells us men who work in TV need to change.
Well, there's growing pressure on the BBC to take MasterChef off air while it investigates the conduct of its presenter, Gregg Wallace. Stephen Fry called it a collision of generations and attitudes.
He also told us why he thinks the Elgin marbles should go back to Greece, and that's our debate at 6:30.
It's Tuesday, the 3rd of December. MasterChef host Gregg Wallace apologises for his comments about middle-class women of a certain age, but not for his conduct on the show.
It was obviously unbelievably foolish of Gregg Wallace to make that video over the weekend. It really showed that he simply wasn't understanding.
We'll be live at Buckingham Palace as the King prepares to welcome the Emir of Qatar for a state visit. Growing gender divide in British politics. We have a special report on what's pushing young men to the right. Redesigning a British icon, Jaguar unveils its new Barbie pink electric vehicle.
Hey, it worked! Nervous moment there, but it's all good.
And bringing you some festive cheer, the Christmas lights go on at Downing Street. Morning, everybody. Welcome to The Breakfast Show here on Sky News Tuesday morning. The BBC facing growing calls to take MasterChef off air while an investigation is carried out into presenter Gregg Wallace. Mr. Wallace has since apologised for his comments over the weekend, blaming middle-class women of a certain age and saying it's obvious he needs to take some time out now. This morning, I spoke to the writer, actor and comedian Stephen Fry about the scandal. He told me Wallace had acted foolishly and failed to understand the feelings of those women he offended.
It was obviously unbelievably foolish of Gregg Wallace to make that video over the weekend. It really showed that he simply wasn't understanding. And, you know, even if he felt that he'd been misunderstood himself, he could surely see that there were some women there who were truly hurt and had felt not listened to, and that he should first of all address that. But, you know, who knows? He's now probably being rightly, I suppose, advised by lawyers. I don't know him. I met him once. We were both guests at a cricket match, and that was, you know, just paying attention to what was going on the green. But yeah, it's obviously some sort of pressure has built up, and now it's, once it starts getting out, as is the way of the media, as we know, once a story gathers momentum, it gallops and gallops faster and faster. But I think if by now people who work in television, men who work in television, don't understand that light banter is no longer something that can be aired in ways, unless they're thinking hard about, is there a sort of victim or a stereotype at the root of this banter who might be hurt? And it's just good manners, really. It's good manners have changed. In Victorian time, it was, you know, certain things couldn't be referred to or seen, and it was only polite to obey this because people were sort of shocked and upset if things were not respected, that they respect. And so I think we've all just got to realise it's not about wokeness. It's just about being sensitive to the atmosphere. You know, if you're having tea with your aunt, you don't turn up wearing shorts and a T-shirt, scratching yourself and filling the air with lots of filthy language. You know your aunt wouldn't appreciate it. But when you're with your friends down the pub, you might. It's as simple as that. You've just got to be, people have to be more attuned to the world in which they live. And I mean, surely we evolved to, you know, to respect the boundaries and the hierarchies of our kith. And that's sort of all that's being asked. And for some, it isn't easy. And so the result is a resounding mess.
Potentially have a little bit of sympathy for him that he was misunderstood?
Well, no. I mean, no. I mean, I'm not going to say that exactly. I mean, I have sympathy for anybody whose life is just suddenly becomes a mess. I can sort of picture myself in that situation and think, oh, my Lord. But I don't think that I'm excusing him or saying that he wasn't obviously a boor, you know, a crashing boor. In both senses, a boorish behaviour and a bore. And, you know, that's not the way to behave on film sets and TV sets and things. You've got to be just one of the bunch.
As always, hit the nail on the head there, didn't he?
Yeah, it was interesting what he was saying, that perhaps in that apology video there should have been more concern for the women who had raised the concerns and the complaints, and also that light banter isn't something that should be aired, and there should be more sensitivity to the atmosphere that someone might find themselves in. But I think this whole situation this morning raises questions now really for the BBC about what it knew, and also why it aired the MasterChef Professionals programme last night. It said it would continue to air the programmes on Mondays, Tuesdays and Thursdays. And a spokesperson said that the programme itself can be a very good opportunity for chefs. Perhaps that's their reason for still airing it. But at the moment, there is an investigation by the production company that makes MasterChef. They are investigating Gregg Wallace's alleged behaviour. Downing Street's also weighed in and said that it is for the BBC and for the production company to decide whether to pull a programme from a schedule. And also a Labour MP, Dr Ruba Huq, who sits on the Culture, Media and Sport Committee, has suggested pulling it while this investigation takes place. But I think at the moment there are now questions as well as to what the BBC knew and when. We understand they were aware of 2 allegations of his behaviour in 2017 and 2018. One relates to Times Radio host Asma Amir, who appeared on Celebrity MasterChef. She raised a complaint to the production company and also to the head of unscripted factual TV for the BBC, Kate Phillips. We understand that she was assured that it was addressed at the time. However, then in 2018, Kate Phillips had to have a 90-minute conversation with Gregg Wallace about his behaviour after another complaint was brought to light. She was made aware of that. So I think questions now really for the BBC about what they do with the upcoming Christmas schedule for MasterChef. And if that isn't pulled, I think questions will remain for the coming days. I think people will be wondering, well, why are you listening to the women's complaints and how that might make women feel, as perhaps Stephen Fry alluded to.
Yeah, Jess Phillips was on for the government this morning and she had a view.
Yeah, she did. She, like you were mentioning, she was talking about how, you know, first of all, she felt that actually the second apology was slightly, you know, been bounced into, let's say, rather than necessarily came kind of off Gregg Wallace's own back. But also she was talking about how she wasn't sure whether it was right to pull the programme because of the opportunity it offers to young and aspiring chefs and the platform it gives them. So she was also saying something similar there. Her main issue was around safeguarding at the BBC and whether there was enough prioritising of safeguarding over the prioritising of talent at the BBC. I think we can have a listen to how Jess Phillips kind of reiterated her point of view.
Gregg Wallace should maybe take a moment to reflect and think about what he says before he says it. My mother used to advise me that I'd missed the perfect opportunity to say nothing, and I think that maybe he should take that advice for a short while. It's very easy to come out and say sorry after you've had a bad reaction to something, but look, these are serious allegations. They are being investigated. I should imagine he would have been better off if he'd just taken part in that investigation.
In other words, keep it shut, Gregg Wallace.
Indeed, yeah. Like we were saying yesterday, kind of digging in the hole with that video. So, you know, the politics of this...
Upset.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sorry if you're upset.
Can we call that a boyfriend apology?
So it'll be interesting to see when you speak to Mel Stride later,
yes.
Whether he makes a comment on this as well, and whether really the questions like you were saying for the BBC, but also whether we're going to see more kind of political interventions about this, and whether the government are going to want to kind of really hear some more concrete answers from the BBC about exactly what they're doing and how they're doing it.
I want to hear from the Culture Secretary. That's who I want to hear from. See what she has to say about it all. It's good to see you. Thanks very much, ladies. Thank you. Also want to hear what's going to happen with the King. He's hosting the Emir of Qatar on a 2-day state visit starting today. The Prince and Princess of Wales will be taking part in the welcoming ceremony, but the Queen is due to miss it as she continues to recover from a chest infection. Let's get more, should we? Laura standing by for us. Queen still poorly.
Yeah, it was back on the 5th of November. We were told she had this chest infection and was cancelling her engagements for the week, but it is lingering, and we understand that that's causing post-viral fatigue. So she has missed a few things since then. She wasn't at the Cenotaph on Remembrance Sunday. She couldn't make the Royal Variety Show either. She has been back to work, although we haven't seen her in the last few days. And today she won't be seen in the morning, although she will be at the palace for the lunch, and she'll make bits of the state banquet. So she'll be there for the photo. She won't be there for the receiving line. I mean, there's 150 guests, so that always takes a while anyway. But she'll be there for the dinner part. Things we will see today, though, is the Princess of Wales. She will be returning to royal duties. A big moment for her. Both her and the Prince of Wales will be accompanying the Emir and his wife to Horse Guards Parade for that official ceremonial welcome where the King will be there. There'll be the traditional Guard of Honour and then a carriage procession all the way along the Mall back to Buckingham Palace for a lunch and a special exhibition. Kate, though, won't be at the state banquet this evening. We will, you know, these state visits are always a big moment, aren't they, for a show of international diplomacy. So you can expect the royal red carpet rolled out fully. There is always that deeper meaning, though. It's a sign, really, of the importance of the relationship between the UK and Qatar, this strategic ally and a key mediator in the Middle East as well. Not everyone is happy about the arrival of the Emir, though. There are expected to be small protests, potentially people unhappy at the human rights records of Qatar as well.
OK, for now, thank you. We've been talking about the new look Jaguar. It's Barbie pink, or certainly one of them is. Gurpreet is here. We asked people for their views after we were talking about it. Kathleen Anderson, good morning, Kathleen. She says, I'd only drive it if it was covered with a tarpaulin. Yeah. And someone else saying that Liberace, great content matters. Liberace isn't with us anymore, so who are they going to sell it to?
Well, a very niche market because it's £100,000. So a lot of people won't have the option of buying it, unfortunately. And it's not what you typically associate with the Jaguar, is it? Nevertheless, it has got elements of the old Jaguar in there. It's got the long bonnet. It sits quite low, which is unusual for an electric vehicle, actually. So it's got aspects of the old Jaguar, but you're probably not going to see it parked outside a golf club in the UK anytime soon. And this is all part of the British car makers' efforts to really revive the brand. It's trying to replicate the success that it had with the E-Type in the 60s, which has gone down as one of kind of the most iconic cars of all time. But it's become quite a tired brand since then. It's struggling with sales, struggling to stay profitable. And now it's going for broke with this new car. It's fully electric. It's part of its efforts to go fully electric by 2026. And to do that, it has to embrace new customers. And some of those customers, well, it says it's going for kind of an international elite market. And in doing that, it might have to leave behind some of its old customers. And it kind of explains some of the kind of futuristic marketing that we're seeing. As part of that, there was this advert which featured no car at all, just a bunch of models, diverse models, you can see there, in brightly coloured clothing with a lot of marketing speak around it. And that caused a bit of a stink, a lot of outrage online. Faux outrage from some saying that it was abandoning its old customer base, that it was becoming woke. The likes of Elon Musk, owner of a rival car company, Tesla, unsurprisingly had negative things to say about it, as did Nigel Farage, MP for Clacton.
OK. Stuart Dillon says, forgetting the colour, the car looks horrible. Dino says, how is it going to navigate the millions of potholes and speed bumps all over the UK? I've heard that one as well, yeah. And Alex Sicker, you'll be able to help with this. He says it's just the concept car. The production car usually looks very different. Yeah, this car won't be going over any potholes in the UK because it is a concept car. It was launched at Miami Art Week. When it goes into active production, this isn't going to be the version that people can actually buy. How reassuring. It won't be too different, but it will be a sort of watered-down version of it. Think of like haute couture on the catwalk. Looks like a Bentley. Do you think? Yeah. Looks like Lady Penelope's car out the Wacky Races.
It does, yeah. It does.
OK, thank you. Thanks very much. All today's top stories now. Here's Gareth.
Yes, good morning. Let's bring up to speed on some of the day's other events. And first off, that ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah looks increasingly fragile. There was a limited exchange of fire between the two sides yesterday. Israel launched airstrikes on southern Lebanon after Hezbollah attacked a watchtower with rockets. The Emir of Qatar begins a state visit to the UK today, hosted by King Charles. The King will welcome Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani at a ceremony in Whitehall as part of the two-day trip. Queen Camilla will miss the occasions as she recovers from a recent chest infection, but will join later for a private lunch. The French Prime Minister Michel Barnier is facing a vote of no confidence this week. Mr Barnier is under fire after he pushed through a contentious budget without parliamentary approval. French politics has been fractured since June, when snap elections delivered no clear majority. Vietnamese property tycoon Trung My Lan has lost her appeal against a death sentence for masterminding the world's biggest bank fraud. In April, the 68-year-old was convicted of embezzling the equivalent of £9 billion. Vietnamese law states if she can pay back 75%, her sentence will be commuted to life imprisonment.
Shadow Chancellor's with us. Mel Stride, you're on the programme more often than I am at the moment.
Well, it's always a pleasure, Kate. It can't keep me away.
Never a chore. Gregg Wallace, where are we?
Well, look, I think, Kate, that is a matter for the BBC, OK? What really matters that's happening today over in the House of Commons
we'll come to
is
that.
the government is going to be putting through... But this is really important.
I'm sure,
this
and we'll come
national
to it.
insurance.
We'll come to
I hope we do, because I think we need to talk about that.
Absolutely, and we will come to it. But answer my question, if you would, please, first, Shadow Chancellor. Gregg Wallace, his behaviour, his reference to women of a certain age and being middle class, and then his faux apology when he realised that it had landed badly, some of the things that he has been saying to women, and the disgusting behaviour on set, although not being recorded, with one young woman that meant that she had to go to the loo and be in floods of tears. Not acceptable.
So what we've been reading about and what has been asserted by many different women across the press, etc., is deeply worrying. It is for the BBC to look into these matters and to come to conclusions. And what I think matters most here is that they get on with that as quickly as possible. But as I say, I think that is a very important set of issues that you've just raised. I think also very important, though, if I can come back to national insurance.
You will when we get
all right,
to it.
when you're ready.
Yeah,
okay.
thank you.
I think that there are other things.
Yes, there is, and we've got 10 minutes, so you've got plenty of time. You're eating into that time by still trying to go back to it.
OK.
So, are the BBC doing enough? That it's yet another incident where the behaviour, specifically of men, sometimes of women, has proven to be not acceptable?
Well, any kind of behaviour of the form described that we're reading about in our newspapers and are out on the airwaves there is clearly, on the face of it, unacceptable. And we need to be a society in which women go into the workforce or go into programmes or TV series, whatever it may be, and don't feel that they're going to be subjected to that kind of behaviour. It's deeply offensive and it's completely wrong. But as I say, I think those are matters that the BBC needs to look into. I think they need to move quickly in doing that and come to conclusions. Because at the end of the day, they, in a sense, should be the judge and jury of this through a proper looking into the matter, rather than perhaps us, opining on the basis of comments in the press. But none of that is to say anything other than it's a very, very serious matter. I actually, without my glasses, Kay, I'm absolutely lost.
It says,
put my glasses on.
OK, put your glasses on.
Go on, then. National insurance, right, hurrah! OK, well, rather not hurrah. Complete doom and gloom, but I'm glad it's on your list.
Tell me.
Well, look, shall I talk about that?
Yes, please.
Look, we had a government that, during the general election, made several hard and fast pledges, and one of them was that it wouldn't be putting taxes up left, right and centre, and specifically in its manifesto it said it would not be increasing national insurance. Now, that is exactly what it is now.
They signposted long before it was in the budget, though, that they were going to do it.
They gave reassurances during the general election. It is there in black and white in their manifesto they would not put it up. Paul Johnson of the IFS said that this is a breach of their manifesto. So don't just take it from me, it is a clear breach. But what really matters now is the impact that this is going to have on the economy and on businesses that are struggling up and down the country. This is a huge hammer blow to those businesses. And not just businesses as we normally think of them, but also those businesses that are providing public services, such as our hospices, some GP surgeries, Marie Curie, those kind of organisations are going to be really clobbered by this. Now, the Office of Budget Responsibility, the independent forecaster, says all of this will lead to lower growth, which is what the government tells us it's trying to achieve, lower growth, lower wages, higher unemployment, higher inflation, higher interest rates for longer, so more expensive mortgages, for example, because of the approach that this government is taking, and we think that's wrong.
Should we be more concerned about the impact of the national insurance rise than we are about pensioners freezing in front of a one-bar fire this winter?
We should be concerned about both. So another broken promise. The government very clearly in the run-up to the election said, for example, that they would not be means testing the winter fuel payment. That's going to affect 10 million pensioners. Of those affected, those pensioners below the poverty line, two-thirds of them are going to lose that benefit at the coldest time of the year. In 2017, the Labour Party, when looking at this issue, which they then rejected, estimated that almost 4,000 pensioners would die prematurely if exactly this policy was brought in. You've seen the same thing with farmers, the farm tax. They absolutely categorically said to the National Farmers Union and others that they would not be bringing in inheritance changes in relation to farms. And they've done exactly that.
All of those things are true.
So this is a pattern,
all of those things are true, but you left them with a massive black hole. Where did you want them to get the money from?
Look, if you go into an election promising one thing and then completely turn on your head and do something very different, you have to concoct some reason why you did it. And this is a confection, this black hole. The OBR looked into this issue. They concluded that the fiscal pressure that was cited, the 22 billion, the figure was under half of that, according to the OBR. They also accepted that had there been discussions between officials at the Treasury and the OBR at the time around that issue, that figure could have been lower. And of course, what we know is that governments, as a matter of course, manage down in-year fiscal pressures. So there is nothing to see there. It is a dead parrot, Kay. OK? It has ceased to exist. It is pushing up the daisies. What we're left with, I'm afraid, is national insurance being increased on a scale that's going to cripple jobs, cripple businesses and hold back the economy.
What do you think the Chancellor's going to do with that 40 billion quid? She's not going to put it in a handbag, is she? She needs it in order to improve public services in this country.
Well, you can improve public services by spending money wisely. And what this government has not done is talked about productivity. So it gave 14% pay increases to the train drivers, 22% to junior doctors, no strings attached, no suggestion that productivity should be improved. We know in the health service, where a lot of this money is going, that productivity has actually gone backwards since the pandemic. So this is the missing piece. You know, that you can spend all this money.
You've had 4 years of that.
The second thing, though, I would say, Kay, is that this huge upfront fiscal splurge, and it is £70 billion of spending additionally each year across this forecast.
How much money did you raise on...
Is actually going to feed into...
How much money did you waste on the Rwanda scheme?
Can I just... Well, let's come back to that. But on this point, we will come back. It's probably on your list, isn't it? It's got Rwanda down there. OK, good. We'll come to it. We will come to it. But if you splurge these huge tens of billions of pounds, it's inflationary. And inflation is higher under the forecast for this budget than it was under the budget that we came forward with back in the spring. And the consequences of that, of course, are higher interest rates, higher mortgage costs, things that slow the economy down, which is why growth across the forecast under this government is going to be lower than it was under our government. But coming to Rwanda...
Yeah, go on.
The wasted money is because the scheme was scrapped. Great, OK. We're getting through your agenda.
Yeah.
The reason there was money that was arguably wasted was that the Labour government scrapped the scheme before it came into operation. We had passed the legislation.
You'd spent hundreds of millions... Oh, no, stop it.
But
you'd spent hundreds of millions of pounds on the Rwanda scheme, and you'd had more Home Secretaries go there than anybody that had been sent as a result of the scheme.
And we were on the brink of getting the flights off the ground. No, we were.
We were on
the brink. We had the planes booked. And look,
why didn't you wait until the planes had gone and then call the election in November?
Elections are called at a particular time for a variety of different issues, not necessarily just where the planes get off the ground. But the fact remains that the planes were ready to go and the deterrent effect was already working. If you remember, there were migrants waiting in France who were not coming across because they were waiting for a Labour government. They were waiting for their friend.
Who?
Their friend says the BBC, who
anecdotally,
went. The numbers show it. The numbers show it, and also the BBC went over and interviewed people in the camps.
We
also saw migrants going from Northern Ireland into Ireland in order to escape our jurisdiction when we had passed the legislation because of the deterrent effect. And when it came to Albania, if you remember, we had a returns arrangement.
To do with Rwanda.
But it is to do with deterrence.
Yeah, but
it's the
nothing
same
to
effect.
do with Rwanda.
But it's the same point. So 93% reduction in the number of Albanians coming here illegally because there was an effective deterrent in place, and that's what Rwanda would have provided if Labour had not scrapped it and wasted all that sunk cost.
OK. Do you want to talk about the Elgin marbles or not?
If it's on your list,
It is on my list.
I think we should.
Should they be returned to Greece?
I don't think so, no. I think that they were, and I'm actually a guide I'm qualified to guide the British Museum, actually, so I have a personal interest.
You mention it every time you're on.
Good,
yeah,
okay.
And Windsor as well, right?
And Windsor Castle and all sorts of other places.
I do my research.
So I'm very interested in the British Museum. And no, I don't think so, because I think at the time that we took possession of those, they went into the museum, that was legitimate. I think they've been kept very safely there. The British Museum
but they're not ours.
But, well, the problem is, though, you could say that of any artefact in any museum anywhere in the world that is not from
so we should give
the
plenty
country
back, then.
Where that museum is. So where do you stop, Kay? You give back the Elgin marbles, you know, does France have to give back the Mona Lisa to Italy? You know, where do you stop with that kind of argument? It's in a very safe place, incredibly well looked after, beautifully presented. It is a world-class museum, the British Museum, with visitors from all over the world who can see those treasures, along with others from other parts of the world as well.
Which is full of stolen stuff.
Well, that's your phraseology. I wouldn't describe it like that. These items, we've got the Rosetta Stone there. Should that be going back to Egypt? You know, where do you end?
There's a world-class museum in Athens that's got an empty wall that was built just for those Parthenon marbles.
Well, that may be the case, but I don't think that.
Should we give it back on a permanent loan?
Well, it wouldn't. It would require an act of Parliament.
Not to do a permanent loan.
No, maybe not a loan, actually. You're probably right. To return them would require an act of. Well, it's something that I believe George Osborne,
when he was in charge at the British Museum,
was definitely talking to the Greeks about.
Do you think that's an idea?
I would be loath to go and make that step. I think once they've gone from our shores, you might not see them again. And I think they belong in the British Museum.
I'm not going to let you come.
Okay. What else have you got on your list? Does it say end of interview?
It's always great to see you. Thanks. Oh, will you be watching MasterChef at Christmas?
Probably, because my family are very into it. So almost.
So we can forgive his indiscretions then.
Well, look, if there are indiscretions, then clearly they have to be dealt with, and they are serious. And I think I've made that point very clear. But I think the BBC does need to look into these issues, crack on with it, get on with it, get to the bottom of it. That's the way to address it.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Thanks, Kate.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Well, the Prime Minister, let's talk about him. He turned on the Christmas lights at Downing Street last night.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yay!
Yay! He didn't sound that excited, did he? Anyway, that we saw that happen late last night, and there was even a choir.
Joyful and triumphant, oh come ye to Bethlehem.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
An enormous explosion that's just come down. I think it was a monster's just landed in between us.
Hundreds and hundreds of people hoping to get north, ultimately to get to the United States.
It's a border where they're not welcome, yet they keep coming.
We saw snatch squads going in, grabbing people, taking them out and putting them into trucks and taking them away.
They make about 50 kilos of fentanyl a week. It's incredibly dangerous and toxic stuff.
There's been an upsurge in deaths. The fighting between the gangs is getting more and more vicious.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah.
The battlefield is outside the barricades, which is over there.
This is much more like a normal town.
It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change. We've been crushed.
Free from wherever you get your news. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. This is real, hardcore emergency medicine. The information on this could bring down the entire network, not just in Iraq and Syria, but across the world. Sky News, the full story first.
Hundreds of thousands of people have been using the beast for years to traverse Mexico, but it is really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. Coming up in just a few moments' time, we're going to be discussing the Elgin or Parthenon marble. Should they be returned to Greece? That to come after the headlines with Gareth.
Yes, good morning. The actor and comedian Stephen Fry has told this programme that the MasterChef host Gregg Wallace had acted foolishly and failed to understand the feelings of those women he offended. The MasterChef presenter has apologised for his comments over the weekend that his complainers were middle-class women of a certain age. The BBC is under pressure to take MasterChef off air while it investigates his conduct. Keir Starmer has given the strongest hint yet that he expects there to be a negotiated peace between Ukraine and Russia. Stalking victims will get the right to learn the name of the person harassing them under new measures announced by the government today. And Downing Street says the Prime Minister won't formally discuss returning the Elgin marbles with his Greek counterpart when the two meet later this morning.
Well, Vicky Price and Rafe Heidelman-Koo are here to talk about that. Vicky, to you, first of all, should they, you're Greek-born, I should say, should they be discussing it today?
Oh, they will be discussing it, I'm sure, and they should as well, because for the Greeks it's very important, and we've already been getting hints that some agreement could be reached at some point. It doesn't have to be done now, and of course it's not the government necessarily which is going to decide, but there'll be discussions with the British Museum, and it looks like they have moved forward in a reasonable way. The Greeks, of course, would quite like to have them all back, and the actual ownership guarantee that it is Greek. The Brits are a little bit more reluctant to do that, so a compromise, I think, is in the offing.
What do you think should happen, right?
Well, I'm very sympathetic to the Greek cause. My grandmother was born in Greece. She was first cousin.
Yep.
She was first cousin of Andreas Papandreou, who was one of the prime ministers who actually called for the return. So I understand all of that. But for me, fundamentally, you know, there are very few museums around the world that are world encyclopedic museums. You have the Louvre, the Met in New York, the British Museum. These are places where the world's greatest treasures can be put into their global context, where we can see in contrast different civilizations. That used to be understood, and it seems now increasingly that we're reducing everything down to ethnicity and nationalism at a time when we should be talking about internationalism rather than nationalism. And that's a very dangerous precedent if we're going to start returning items to say, essentially, if you want to see Egyptian or Greek works, you have to go to those countries to see them. Surely these are part of world heritage, and many more millions of people will see these items in London, New York and Paris. These items were actually saved by Lord Elgin, you know, and more than half of the marbles were actually destroyed and damaged when they arrived there. They were legally acquired. You know, Greece is a 19th century construct today. They were purchased legally from the Sultan. The British Parliament actually held an inquiry into the legality of the acquisition. You know, unthinkable to see any other government saying that in that era, and they deemed them to be legally acquired.
OK, Vicky's wincing as you say so many things, so where do you want to start?
Well, yes, where to start? I mean, first of all, whether they were legally acquired. There's a big, big debate about that, and it doesn't look like they were. Even the Turks have recently come out and said there wasn't really a paper that actually authorised Lord Elgin to take those marbles away. So that's number one. Second, they were sort of chiselled away from where they originally belonged to, supposedly for safekeeping, when, of course, they were partly destroyed on the way over. And, of course, they were then partly destroyed at the British Museum itself when they tried to clean them up. And the Greeks have now built a very good museum, the Acropolis Museum, where you can put these things in there in a very safe way. There's an empty wall
waiting for them, I believe.
It's waiting there, and it's a fantastic position just by the Acropolis, so you can actually line them all up to the Parthenon. So that would be amazing. So there is no concern about that. And in terms of visitors, it's absolutely true. I think we do want to be able to portray, you know, the civilization of various countries when you go and visit a museum. There's no doubt about that. I think the British Museum is brilliant in that. It doesn't have, though, to have all those things in there. It can lend them, which I think is probably going to be the case. It can reproduce, like the Greeks have done, what was there by using modern technology, you know, 3D printing. You can just have all those things appear in the museum anyway. And I don't see why all the visitors who go to Greece, and there are tens of millions every year that go to Greece, cannot enjoy those marbles themselves while they're there. Why should there be an exclusivity in the British Museum at all?
3D Elgin marbles at the British Museum. What's wrong with that?
Well, 3D Elgin marbles at the Parthenon. What's wrong with that? That's what I would say.
They already exist, actually.
Well, exactly. There are already marbles at the Parthenon. You know, I think it's good to have them in more than one place. There's no reason you can't have those copies perfectly well installed at the Parthenon. You have to remember, of course, that, you know, it's been grossly exaggerated how much damage was done to them in the 1930s at the British Museum. In fact, similar techniques were being used in the 1950s, even in Greece and elsewhere, actually, where more damage was caused, also with the pollution and the weathering from Athens. I think they've also become part of Britain's history and Britain's story and of the British Museum story, you know. And I think there should actually be a permanent exhibition in the British Museum celebrating the British, the French and the Germans who rediscovered global civilizations, you know, from India to Africa to Europe, and in terms of, you know, discovering things which the native populations actually had taken for granted and didn't know that much about. It's a great period of our history, how we've actually managed to save for World Heritage items of localised civilization.
We are where we are. What do you think is going to happen?
Oh, I think there will be a compromise. I think the Greeks will have to put up probably with the fact that they will be lent some of those back, the ones that really matter.
Permanent loan?
Well, it will then turn into a permanent loan. And they will bring things over as well from Greece. I think there's going to be a much more cultural exchange than there has been. And I think politically also it makes a huge amount of sense, given that we're trying to reset relationships with Europe, for the government here to be pretty accommodating on this.
Yes, I think, you know, we've seen this government placing ideology over Britain's national interest with the return of the Chagos Islands, for example, and I think very much the feeling is there in the shadow cabinet that these items should go back in some form or another. So I wouldn't be surprised that this government will do what a previous Conservative government wouldn't have thought of.
But the people of the Chagos Islands, of course, wanted them to be returned to them.
Yeah, but they haven't been involved in the process at all. And, of course, we've annoyed our greatest ally. Well, let's not discuss the Chagos Islands, but the point is, it was a very retrograde step.
I thought we were going to go on to the Falklands. But that's the debate for another day. It's great to see you both. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. I usually see much more animated across.
Something's different this time.
Yes, it is.
It must be my presence.
Exactly that. That's what he's suggesting. It's good to see you both. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Let's talk about Nigel Farage. He's managed to persuade more than 4 million people to vote reform at the general election, and lots of them were young men. Our political correspondent, Serena Barker-Singh, reports.
Reform UK had the most online engagement of any party this election.
TikTok was the place where I saw them, that's where they sort of made the name for themselves, especially Nigel.
And who was watching? Well, mostly young men.
Young blokes want to be young blokes, and they feel the world is telling them not to be young blokes.
Something remarkable is happening with Gen Z.
Data from the general election shows a growing gulf between how young men and women are voting. The so-called bro vote is on the rise, with young men twice as likely to have voted reform in the election than young women. And for 16 to 17-year-olds, 35% of young men said they would have voted reform, making Farage's party as popular with this demographic as Labour.
Hey guys, look again. The conference hasn't...
Nick became a political influencer after his first TikTok supporting reform went viral overnight. It is young people, but it's also young boys, young men.
Yes.
What do you think it is about reform that attracts that demographic?
I think with the onset of fourth wave feminism and all of that, I for one believe that young men are feeling increasingly disenfranchised by society.
Hello, my name is George Finch. I'm 18 years old.
George Finch started a reform-focused magazine online. He says it's by reformers for reformers.
All of us have got that one common goal, and it's to get reform to win.
You want as many voters to vote for you as possible.
Yeah.
So if you see it skewed so heavily in one way, surely you want to make sure as many people are voting.
Sure if you see this as a significant issue for reform, I'm sure HQ are solving this.
This is Charlie. He spent the summer campaigning for Reform UK on a battle bus with Nigel Farage.
We stand here united!
But 3 months later, now at just 13 years old, he's moved further to the right, attending and speaking at Tommy Robinson rallies.
I've got an opinion on immigration and stuff like that. Obviously, stop the votes and all that kind of stuff.
Do you think from the summer to now you've spent more time online?
Yes, and I believe me being online has helped me actually develop my views. Because if I, say for example, if I were to just watch a normal TV, I would say, oh, what a racist person he is, what a racist person they are. But no, now I'm on Twitter, I see it all firsthand.
And increasing numbers do seem to be listening. An anti-establishment rhetoric now filling a political gap that mainstream politics won't.
35% of boys, well, men 16 to 17 would have voted reform.
Yeah, that was one survey. So I was trying to, yeah, it's quite astonishing. So I was trying to figure out exactly how broad this support was. Essentially, it's called the bro vote. It played out in the US election, but I think it did play a part in British elections to a lesser extent, sort of young men leaning to the right, but now they have a party they feel is a political home, which is Reform. Now, Nigel Farage knows this, he's building on this, focusing a lot of messages towards young men. One of the tip-offs that we had was when he seemingly seemed to endorse Andrew Tate, this influencer of young men, but controversial voice too. He said it was an important voice for young men, and Sky News challenged him on that. That was a knowing message that he was putting out there. So I was trying to speak to some of his supporters, see what they were thinking, and essentially it's a new political campaigning, a fusion of online identities with this old-style campaigning, and Reform are really leaning into it. Actually, when we asked them about our story, they continue to call their supporters young supporters. They wouldn't be drawn in on the gender divide between young men and young women and how they were voting. So we're trying to get a sense from the party how knowing this is, but I still think there are a lot of questions for them to answer. I would say the reason why Labour are privately a bit concerned by this is that whilst young voters are quite flaky, so they don't turn out necessarily to vote, they do seem to stick with the party that they voted for at the first election. There is this sticking power, so there's perhaps quite a big political prize. If you vote one way at 18, you're more likely to stick with that party throughout your life.
That makes sense. OK, for now, thank you, Serena. Thank you. More from Serena and her piece online throughout the day, of course. Still to come on The Breakfast Show. Keir Starmer tells Ukraine to prepare for peace. We'll ask what they might have to give up to end the war with Russia.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent.
It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century.
I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland
have reached agreement.
If there's anyone who might know how to fix Northern Ireland's devolved government, it's the American architect.
Changes in circumstance require changes in approach.
The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland.
I confirm that I am willing to take up the office of First Minister. My election to the post of First Minister demonstrates the change that's happening on this island.
Catholics and Protestants on different sides, now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19 and end up in hospital, religion's nothing.
People here are adept at finding hope amid adversity. That's the spirit of a place that punches way above its weight. We help you understand the world with us. A toxic blue-green algae now poisoning Loch Ness. It's breaking your heart what has happened here.
It is.
This is a vital resource, a national treasure, now fighting for its very life. They are effectively surrounded by Northern Ireland, and that makes this the most unlikely of international frontiers.
If there's a hard border, I think it'll cripple the country.
Winter is coming. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. Sky News, the full story first.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Significant day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. Tuesday morning, the son of a banker shot dead on his doorstep 20 years ago has called on Scotland's top police officer to resign. Alistair Wilson's killer still hasn't been caught. Conor Gillis reports.
Did you make the fire police for ambulance? Oh, my husband's been shot. Listen to me, I can't hear you. Do you want the fire police for ambulance? Oh, my God! Curtin Road. Who do you want to speak to? The fire police or ambulance? Police or ambulance. My husband's just been shot.
The oldest boy knows that his dad was shot. Somebody shot him with a gun. All these things he didn't understand, and I've had to explain to him. And now it's just, well, why? Why did he shoot my daddy?
And now, 20 years on, that boy, now this young man, still has the same question after these eyes witnessed his father's last moments.
All I saw was my dad on the floor in a pool of his own blood, and my mum over him. I still get the image of my dad himself in nightmares and stuff from time to time.
And how do you explain this to a child, to anyone? The beaming smiles of father and son hours before a cold-blooded killing in this small seaside Highland town.
I blanked out a lot of my childhood memories from the council and stuff. That was my way of dealing with it all, was just kind of closing the door on that kind of part of my life.
Bank manager Alistair Wilson was reading a bedtime story to his sons when his wife answered the door to a stranger calling her husband by name. A blue envelope with the name Paul was handed over. Then he was shot dead, executed in cold blood, the gunman vanishing into the night.
It was difficult when people would say that it was my mum. That was the thing that's what I got in trouble for in school, or if it was ever for fighting or anything like that, was because someone would come up and say it was my mum, and that would be me. I've already lost a parent, and then my other one's getting made out to be something that I know they're not. Yeah, that was my biggest struggle.
With rumour rife over the years here in Nairn, detectives really looked at Alistair Wilson's background, his job at the bank and theories about a possible hitman. It wasn't until later years, though, they examined a possible motive involving his objection to a beer garden here at the pub across the road. But could that grievance really trigger such violence? The former owner of this place is a witness in a protracted investigation that's lost the confidence of the Wilsons.
It was only 18 months, 2 years ago, we were told by the police that someone was going to be arrested on a certain day, and then no one contacted us. We had to go chasing, we had to phone the police and ask what was going on, and we were told that the arrest didn't happen. To this day, we still don't know why the arrest didn't happen. No one has told us. That's all we wanted to know. That's why we were asking to meet the chief, and she still refuses to meet us.
Do you think the Police Scotland Chief Constable should resign over this?
There's no other option. I felt that if she can't get a grasp of what's going on, then how can she lead?
And a grasp of it is what she is attempting to do. Inside here is where officers are now fully reinvestigating the doorstep murder. Chief Constable, the family of Alistair Wilson are calling for you to resign. They say you failed to get a grip on this case. What do you say?
Well, I won't be resigning, and I'm committed to us getting answers and finding the people responsible for the murder.
They say your force is incapable of doing that. What do you say to that? This is a case with controversy, some clues, but no closure, in what has now become a fight to get the truth.
Visit his grave, would try and toast him on his birthday and try to do nice things around his birthday. He would have been 50 this year. We all got together, full family, and had a kind of marked it that way, but there's only so much that you can do.
Conor Gillis, Sky News, Nairn.
I want to talk about the situation in Ukraine now. We know Sir Keir Starmer has been speaking about it and saying that peace talks need to start in order to safeguard the people of Ukraine, and we'll talk about that, amongst other things, with Julian Evans, author of Undefeatable, Odessa in Love and War. Tell me about Odessa.
Odessa is, it was a city of dreams, really. I went first there in 1994 and it was crumbling after the communist era. And still, I saw a place that really looked like a dream. It had been built in the 19th century, grown very fast. And Italians had built it. In the middle of the 19th century, even the street names were in Italian as well as Russian. And it's developed enormously since then, since the 19th century and since the end of the communist period. It's an irrepressible city full of immigrants, very liberal immigration policies when it started up. So you found French, German, Italians, Greeks, British there. And as a result, it's a kind of cultural and artistic melting pot that has always had a very strong Jewish element too. It's always had a bit of a reputation for criminality.
Because it's a major port.
It's a major port, and that often happens.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful place. I fell in love with it in 1994, and I've been going back ever since.
It's been very much targeted, though, during the war.
Yes, it's had, because of its proximity to Crimea, it's been shelled and suffered missile attacks a lot. I was there in the winter of 22 when the Russians started bombing energy infrastructure, and so there were blackouts all the time. And just recently, it's got much worse.
You fell in love in Odessa?
I did.
And you married in a monastery?
I did, yes, I did. I went, after my first trip, I wanted to go back as soon as possible, and on the second trip, a few years later, I fell in love with a painter who I met. She was working as a waitress in one of the restaurants, and we got married a year later in a monastery opposite the main train station, which was, it came as a surprise to me. I resisted the idea at first because I thought, the cultural differences would be very great, but in the end, it was impossible to resist.
Good, good. How do you feel about Ukraine now? Do you feel that President Zelensky is best representing the people there?
Yes. I can't imagine anybody more determined, more resolute, more heroic. This is a leader who hasn't had a day's rest since he said to President Biden, "I want ammunition, not a ride," nearly 3 years ago. And I think it's us who failed him, really, rather than the other way around in any way. He has constantly asked for more help, which we've slow walked to him. This year has been an absolute disaster in those terms. All the promises were hardly fulfilled at all. As a Ukrainian friend said to me, this is like the tears of a crying cat. You try to collect them and there's nothing there. They say they're going to send missiles, they say they're going to send weaponry, tanks and so on. 1 or 2, half a dozen arrived, nothing like enough. And the Ukrainians are fighting on our behalf a tyranny, a dictatorship, whose territorial ambitions are exactly the same as that last dictatorship we fought against 80 years ago.
Do you think President Trump will see it that way?
Do you know, I think actually the sort of dynamic shift of Trump arriving after there's been so much stalemate is going to be a good thing, because negotiations are up to Ukraine, ultimately. And I think President Trump will, for all his sudden announcements, I think he will take guidance from his security advisors, from his intelligence officers, and that there's every chance that he will make possibly even slightly better decisions than Biden.
Wars only ever end around the table. When I went to, almost 2 years ago now, to interview Zelensky in Kiev. My colleague interviewed him just the other day. What he said to me 2 years ago and what he's saying now is very different. He needs to negotiate a peace plan, surely.
He knows that he needs to negotiate, and there must be negotiations. And you ask yourself why? And the answer is that the Ukrainians are exhausted.
Yeah.
They've been fighting on their own. Yeah. While the Russians have had Iranian drones and North Korean troops fighting with them.
Julian, we're out of time, but I appreciate you talking to us on the programme. Author of Undefeatable, Odessa, In Love and War. Thank you very much
Thank
indeed.
you.
Thank you. Back in just a moment with all today's top stories.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Hi everybody, a very good morning to you. It's 9 o'clock. Coming up on The Breakfast Show for you here on Sky News Tuesday morning, the actor and writer Stephen Fry tells us men who work in TV need to change.
Well, there's growing pressure on the BBC to take MasterChef off air while it investigates the conduct of its presenter, Gregg Wallace. Stephen Fry called it a collision of generations and attitudes.
Plus, we'll speak to actress Nicola Thorpe about new laws on stalking and what difference they would have made to her.
It's Tuesday, the 3rd of December. Gregg Wallace apologises for his comments about middle-class women of a certain age, but not for his conduct on the programme. Stephen Fry tells us it's an ugly media circus.
The rather right-wing press, which generally speaking promotes and pushes an anti-woke agenda in which they bemoan, oh, can't you tell any jokes anymore these days? They're constantly going, but they have to balance that against their hatred of the BBC.
Also heard Keir Starmer tells Ukraine to prepare for peace talks with Russia. We'll hear live from NATO this hour.
I'm at Buckingham Palace as the King prepares to host a state visit for the Emir of Qatar.
Hey, it worked. Nervous moment there, but it's all good. Thank you very much.
And bringing you some festive cheer, the Christmas lights go on at Downing Street. Hello everybody, a very good morning. The BBC facing growing calls to take MasterChef off air while an investigation is carried out into the presenter Gregg Wallace. Mr Wallace has since apologised for his comments over the weekend, blaming middle-class women of a certain age, and says it's obvious he needs to take some time out now. This morning, I spoke to the writer, actor and comedian Stephen Fry about the scandal. He told me Wallace had acted foolishly and failed to understand the feelings of those women he offended.
It was obviously unbelievably foolish of Gregg Wallace to make that video over the weekend. It really showed that he simply wasn't understanding. And, you know, even if he felt that he'd been misunderstood himself, he could surely see that there were some women there who were truly hurt and had felt not listened to, and that he should, first of all, address that. But, you know, who knows? He's now probably being rightly, I suppose, advised by lawyers. Yes, I don't know him. I met him once. We were both guests at a cricket match, and that was, you know, just paying attention to what was going on the green. But yeah, it's obviously some sort of pressure has built up, and now it's, once it starts getting out, as is the way of the media, as we know, once a story gathers momentum, it gallops and gallops faster and faster. But I think if by now people who work in television, men who work in television, don't understand that light banter is no longer something that can be aired in ways, unless they're thinking hard about, is there a sort of victim or a stereotype at the root of this banter who might be hurt? And it's just good manners, really. It's good manners have changed. In Victorian time, it was, you know, certain things couldn't be referred to or seen, and it was only polite to obey this because people were sort of shocked and upset if things were not respected, that they respect. And so I think we've all just got to realise it's not about wokeness. It's just about being sensitive to the atmosphere. You know, if you're having tea with your aunt, you don't turn up wearing shorts and a T-shirt, scratching yourself and filling the air with lots of filthy language. You know your aunt wouldn't appreciate it. But when you're with your friends down the pub, you might. It's as simple as that. You've just got to be, people have to be more attuned to the world in which they live. And I mean, surely we evolved to, you know, to respect the boundaries and the hierarchies of our kith. And that's sort of all that's being asked. And for some, it isn't easy. And so the result is a resounding mess.
Potentially have a little bit of sympathy for him that he was misunderstood?
Well, no. I mean, no. I mean, I'm not going to say that exactly. I mean, I have sympathy for anybody whose life is just suddenly becomes a mess. I can sort of picture myself in that situation and think, oh, my Lord. But I don't think that I'm excusing him or saying that he wasn't obviously a boor, you know, a crashing boor. In both senses, a boorish behaviour and a bore. And, you know, that's not the way to behave on film sets and TV sets and things. You've got to be just one of the bunch.
Let's bring in Dorothy Byrne. She is the former head of news at Channel 4 with us now. Always great to see you, Dorothy. Thanks for taking the time to join us. What did you make of what Stephen Fry was saying?
Well, I just caught the end of it. I think it's more than boorish behaviour. One woman complained he told the joke about rape. I mean, that is utterly unacceptable. There have been 3 reports that he actually touched women. A woman said that he constantly talked to her about his sex life. Another woman said that she was questioned about lesbian sex. This is really tantamount to harassment and bullying at work when women are subjected to embarrassing and humiliating behaviour like that from a man who has great power, because the presenter of a television programme has huge power, and the young women and men who work on the programme, who are very often on short-term contracts in very insecure employment at a time when there's very high unemployment in the industry, are not in a position to be able to turn around and say, shut up, I don't want to hear this filthy, smutty, tawdry talk.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I have to throw it in there for the lawyers, that he denies any of those allegations against him, and the BBC and also Banijay, which is the company that is making MasterChef, is looking into those allegations. What do you say, Dorothy, as a middle-class woman of a certain age, when people are saying that it's wokeness and it's just going too far?
Well, I am a woman of a certain age, and Gregg Wallace is a man of a certain age, the age of the dinosaurs. I am, as well as being the former head of news, the leader of a college for women at Cambridge University. There are 630 young women at Murray Edwards College. I can tell you, they're not women of a certain age. They are young women. They are women of all classes, and they wouldn't put up with that sort of talk. I think it's just misogynist, isn't it? He has come out and attacked older women, and that's what misogynists do. They don't like older women because we've got a bit of power and we can stand up to them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that he would have spoken to me in that way, because the ramifications would have, put him straight back in his box. But there are other women, of our age, it has to be said, Dorothy, who don't have a voice like we have.
Yes, and it's not just a matter of age. And there are women of our age who are disempowered, who are in low-paid, insecure work. But some of the celebrities who have talked about it, who you would think were really empowered, have said that they were deeply embarrassed and upset, and they didn't necessarily say anything at the time. And that's often one of the things, isn't it, as a woman, if the man in charge, the most important man in the room, tells a dirty joke, everybody else giggles because they feel they have to go along with him, and you're the only one who says something, you feel that you look like the killjoy and the prude, but actually that's not what you are.
No,
but that can be how it feels.
Absolutely. I'd be very happy for him to come and talk to me on the programme if he would like to at any stage over the next few days or weeks, whether he wants to talk about his sex life or not. Can't imagine that that would take very long. As a former head of a news organisation, how should this have been handled?
Well, it's very disappointing and disturbing to learn that allegedly the BBC has known about these sorts of complaints for more than 10 years. We have been told that in 2017, a very senior executive called him in and told him that this behaviour was unacceptable. And yet it went on for another 7 years, so it was accepted. And now the BBC has said it has robust procedures. It clearly does not. And it says it does not tolerate bad behaviour, but it has tolerated it. They needed to draw a line under this as soon as they received the first report. And actually, if they had done that, if they had carpeted him and told him, you must never speak like this again, and if you do, you'll be out of the door, he wouldn't be in the position he is in now.
BBC still plans to air recorded episodes of MasterChef, both MasterChef The Professionals this week, the rest of this week and next week, and then also, I believe, airing as we speak, the MasterChef Christmas specials. Some MPs suggesting that could be triggering for women who have been offended, insulted, seriously upset by his behaviour. Is that taking it too far?
I think the issue is a slightly different one. I can absolutely understand why the BBC would want to show these programmes, because it would be such a terrible disappointment to the brilliant chefs who we have come to love. We're all rooting for the one that we particularly like. So it would be a terrible disappointment. But the problem is, by airing them, you make it look as if business as usual is continuing, and he can just carry on behaving as he has.
Yeah. I suppose the argument could be that it empowers him by allowing the episodes to continue. What would you do?
I think very reluctantly I would suspend them until there is an investigation, because the problem is we know that he was permitted to carry on like this for more than a decade with BBC executives knowing, and if you put out the programme, it just looks as if, well, he can just carry on. But I do see it's a very difficult decision, and I feel very sorry for the brilliant contestants. This is overshadowing all their wonderful achievements at cooking.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? Maybe AI could come out. I was talking to the team in the office. Maybe they could withdraw them for now, use AI, get him out of there, and then air them subsequently. I don't know. What do I know? I'm just a flesh prop. Let's wait and see what happens. It's good to see you, as always, Dorothy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Let's talk about the King. He's hosting the Emir of Qatar on a 2-day state visit starting today. The Prince and Princess of Wales will be taking part in the welcoming ceremony, but the Queen is due to miss it as she continues to recover from a chest infection. Let's get more. Laura standing by outside the palace for us this morning. She's still poorly. She's been poorly for ages.
I know. It was back in November the 5th, that we were told she had this chest infection, that she had to cancel her engagements for the week then. Since then, she has gone back to work, but hasn't made some pretty big events. So she wasn't at the Cenotaph Remembrance Sunday. She didn't make the Royal Variety Show. And yeah, late yesterday evening, we were told that she wouldn't be able to make it to the ceremonial welcome part of this state visit today. She'll be at the lunch a little later on, and she will be at the state banquet, but she'll miss bits of it. So she won't be be at the official receiving line. I mean, there are 150 guests due to come, so that line does take a while, but it's all because of this post-viral fatigue she's suffering from. The palace keen to stress nothing more sinister than that, but this has been going on for, well, almost a month now. Things we will see today, well, plenty of pomp and pageantry. These state visits are always this very big show of diplomatic diplomatic displays. The importance really is stressed of the international relationship between the UK and Qatar, such an important ally and a really pivotal kind of country when it comes to Middle East mediation at the moment. So other things we will see, as well as the pomp and pageantry, the Princess of Wales, she is back on royal duties today, so we'll see her at the ceremonial welcome. There'll be the Guard of Honour, there'll be a carriage procession along the Mall, a lunch at the palace, and then of course that big state banquet a little bit later on. There may well be protests too, not everyone happy about the arrival of the Emir of Qatar. Kay.
OK, for now, thank you. Rest of today's news for you now. Here's Gareth.
Yes, let's talk about Sir Keir Starmer, who's given the strongest hint yet that he expects there to be a negotiated peace between Ukraine and Russia. The Prime Minister was speaking at the Lord Mayor's banquet in London, where he set out what Ukraine's allies need to do ahead of any potential peace talks with Russia's President Putin.
We must continue to back Ukraine and do what it takes to support their self-defence for as long as it takes, to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position for negotiations so that they can secure a just and lasting peace on their terms that guarantees their security, independence, and the right to choose their future.
Well, we expect to hear from the NATO Secretary-General, Mark Rutte, at about 9:30. We'll bring that to you live here on Sky News. In other news this morning, the ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah looks increasingly fragile. There was a limited exchange of fire between the two sides yesterday. Israel launched airstrikes on southern Lebanon after Hezbollah attacked a watchtower with rockets. The French Prime Minister Michel Barnier is facing a vote of no confidence this week. Mr Barnier is under fire after he pushed through a contentious budget without parliamentary approval. French politics has been fractured since June, when snap elections delivered no clear majority. The Vietnamese property tycoon Trong My Lan has lost her appeal against a death sentence for masterminding the world's biggest bank fraud. In April, the 68-year-old was convicted of embezzling the equivalent of £9 billion. Vietnamese law states if she can pay back 75%, her sentence will be commuted to life imprisonment.
Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you here on Sky News Tuesday. Morning broadcaster Nicola Thorpe joining us to discuss new stalking laws concerning victims' right to know.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
An enormous explosion that's just come down. I think it was a monster just landed in between us.
Hundreds and hundreds of people hoping to get north, ultimately to get to the United States.
It's a border where they're not welcome, yet they keep coming.
We saw snatch squads going in, grabbing people, taking them out and putting them into trucks and taking them away.
They make about 50 kilos of fentanyl a week. It's incredibly dangerous and toxic stuff.
We're seeing an upsurge in deaths. The fighting between the gangs is getting more and more vicious.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah.
The battlefield is outside the barricades, which is over there. This is much more like a normal town. It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change. We're being crushed.
Free from wherever you get your news. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. This is real, hardcore emergency medicine. The information on this could bring down the entire network, not just in Iraq and Syria, but across the world. Sky News, the full story first.
Hundreds of thousands of people have been using the beast for years to traverse Mexico, but it is really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. A win for stalking victims who will now get the right to learn the name of the person harassing them under new measures announced by the government. Let's get more. Joining us is broadcaster and actress Nicola Thorpe, who was stalked for 2 years before her stalker was arrested and jailed last year. Nicola, it's good to see you. Thanks for taking the time to join us. Tell me what it's like when you're being stalked.
Thank you. Well, for me, it was extremely difficult for the first 2 years because this man created almost 30 different online profiles to stalk and harass me. So for a while, it took me 6 months or so to realise it was actually the same individual. But the most difficult point came when I was told by the police that he'd actually been arrested. They identified who he was. And after those 2 years, I kind of breathed this sigh of relief and thought, fantastic, who is he? This mystery man who's made my life miserable. And they said, well, we can't tell you. They couldn't tell me whether it was somebody that I knew, somebody that I used to know, a colleague, or even an ex-partner. And I think that was the point at which I became more paranoid and more upset. And that's why I've campaigned for the past year and a half to get victims the right to know the identity of their online stalker.
And that's now changed, hasn't it? Or it will change?
It has indeed, yes. No, it's going to be changing later on today. So the Home Office have announced 6 new measures to help support victims of stalking, one of which is the right to know. So, yes, I'm absolutely delighted with the work that the Home Office has done on this.
Have you found out who your stalker was?
Yes, I did. I found out in, sadly, an unconventional way. I found out his name when I went to court for a stalking protection order against him. And actually, the first time that I came face-to-face with him, the first time that I saw what this man who terrorised me for so long looked like, was when I went to court to read out my victim impact statement. As many people know, when you go to court, you go through a kind of airport-style security system. And he was the man in front of me. I heard him say his name to the security guard, and I just froze. I finally got to know what this man actually looked like in the worst possible setting, and ended up having to sit with him in a waiting room for half an hour before our court session began. So yeah, it was terrifying and upsetting, and not something that any victim of stalking should have to go through.
What was his problem? I mean, what was his beef, this unimpressive man?
I mean, do you know what? Stalking is different for so many victims. There are no two similar cases, which is why I've got so much sympathy for police officers who might often find it quite difficult to charge or investigate. With my stalker, I still don't know, other than I know that he had a lot of mental health issues. I really don't know why he singled me out. I have a feeling it's because I'm a women's rights activist. This is something that he mentioned in the slew of online misogynistic messages that he sent to me, but no two cases are the same. But I would say that a theme that seems to join all stalking situations, not just women being victims, of course, but men too, although women are the majority of victims. I think it's about power. I think there's something, particularly with online stalking, where they have that, or used to have that air of anonymity. I think people felt perhaps they finally got some power or some control in their lives. Perhaps they weren't happy with the lives that they're leading. And I'm so glad that as of today, that power is now back in the hands of the victims.
As it should be. Stalking protection orders, can you tell me about those?
Yes, they're going to be more widely available. So, for example, if a stalking protection order wasn't given to somebody before their stalker was convicted, that stalking protection order can now be put in place, because believe it or not, some stalkers, including a man who stalked Jess Phillips, the minister who's been at the forefront of this campaign, from prison, because there were no protections for her whilst her stalker was actually in prison. That is now going to change. And also, if somebody suspected of stalking has actually been acquitted, but there still is considered to be a risk to a victim, a stalking protection order can be taken out.
OK, and just to go back to your stalker, who apparently on occasion called himself the Grim Reaper, he's now in prison, isn't he?
That's right. Yes, he's serving a 30-month sentence in prison and will be part of a rehabilitation programme, thank goodness, because I don't know about other victims, but for me, it wasn't necessarily about a prison sentence, although that is important, of course, as a form of punishment and a deterrent. But I really want to make sure that people who are taking part in these kinds of behaviours speak to professionals and go through some evidence-based learning and programmes that mean that they are less likely to partake in this behaviour in the future. But yeah, I am glad to say that he is serving a prison sentence at the moment.
That's very gracious of you to have that view, Nicola. But how are you doing now?
I'm good. I mean, it's nice to talk about this with a positive light. You know, I've been campaigning for this over 18 months now, and I constantly feel like I'm having to bang down doors, etc. But it's really lovely to now know that these doors have just been opened and people have gone, do you know what, this is ridiculous. And it's not just about me and my case. This is about thousands of people. In fact, 1.5 million people in the UK have been victims of stalking, and it's all about making some change for them, letting them know that the police will take you seriously, they will be on your side, and by order of the Home Secretary herself, will give victims the right to know that anonymous person who thinks that they have power over your life because they hide behind a keyboard, well, they can't hide anymore.
Yeah, I would never bet against people if they've got Jess Phillips in their corner, that's for sure. It's good to see you.
Absolutely not. Lovely to see you, and thank you for covering the story.
Take care. Thank you. Thanks very much. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you here on Sky News. We go live to Brussels, where the new NATO Secretary-General, that's Mark Rutte, of course, will be speaking with Ukraine, high on the agenda. Hello again, everybody. Waiting to hear from the new NATO Secretary General in Brussels. He's going to be Mark Rutte, of course. He's going to be talking, amongst other things, about the latest situation in Ukraine. As soon as we see him take to the dais, and the podium, we will, of course, cross there live. Before that, though, here's Gareth with today's top stories.
The actor and comedian Stephen Fry has told this programme that the MasterChef host Gregg Wallace had acted foolishly and failed to understand the feelings of those women he offended. The MasterChef presenter has apologised for his comments over the weekend that his complainers were middle-class women of a certain age. The BBC is under pressure to take MasterChef off air while it investigates his conduct. Keir Starmer has given the strongest hint yet that he expects there to be a negotiated peace between Ukraine and Russia. We expect, like Kate has said, to be hearing from the Secretary-General of NATO, Mark Rutte, in any moment's time. Stalking victims will get the right to learn the name of the person harassing them under new measures announced by the government. And Downing Street says the Prime Minister won't formally discuss returning the Elgin marbles with his Greek counterpart when the two meet this morning.
Still waiting to hear from the NATO Secretary-General, going there into Brussels as soon as he begins to speak. Before that, though, got these two fabulous ladies here with me, talking about Gregg Wallace and that apology or otherwise.
Yeah, I think it's been received perhaps differently by different people, depending on your point of view. But I think the main questions this morning really are for the BBC and what they knew when these allegations first started to emerge, and also questions now about the schedule for MasterChef. They are airing the episodes on Mondays, Tuesdays and Thursdays, and they are at this point still planning to air the Christmas episodes. It is a big programme for the BBC, so questions as to whether that will be pulled still remains. There is, of course, an ongoing investigation by the production company who makes MasterChef, Banijay UK. They are looking at his alleged conduct. And this all comes while Downing Street has somewhat lightly weighed into the issue as well, saying that if a programme were to be pulled, it's down to the BBC and down to the production company. And in terms of questions for the BBC and what they knew, the BBC has said it would be wrong to say that they didn't act on complaints when they arose. A source has said that there were interventions in both 2017 and 2018 and action was taken. And we understand those are the dates when the BBC was made aware of complaints that were brought to light about his alleged behaviour. So it is something that I think, unless we see a change perhaps in that TV schedule, there may still be questions this morning and perhaps for the coming days as well.
Yeah, that was 6 years ago, of course, so we'll wait and see what happens with MasterChef. Meantime, let's take you to Brussels.
Yes, good morning, good to see you. Today, as you know, and tomorrow, NATO foreign ministers will meet, and we have many urgent security issues to discuss. This afternoon we will welcome His Majesty King Abdullah II of Jordan to our meeting. The King has been a guest at NATO many times, but this will be the first time he is participating in the meeting of NATO foreign ministers. Jordan is one of NATO's most important partners in the Middle East. We will open our NATO liaison office in Amman soon. And this is an important step in making our deep relationships in the region even stronger. I'm therefore grateful for King Abdullah's presence. We will discuss the ongoing conflict in the Middle East and its impact on Euro-Atlantic security. This evening we will have a working dinner of the NATO-Ukraine Council, for the first time with Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha. The new EU High Representative, Kaja Kallas, will also join us, because NATO and the EU must work closely together in our support for Ukraine. Ukraine is entering another crucial winter, and Russia's aggression shows no sign of abating. Just the opposite. Putin is ramping up his rhetoric and reckless actions. He is using Ukraine as a testing ground for experimental missiles and is deploying North Korean soldiers in this illegal war. Putin is not interested in peace. He is pressing on, trying to take more territory, because he thinks he can break Ukraine's resolve and ours. But he is wrong. Ukraine has a right to defend itself, and we have a duty to help them. So we need to continue our steadfast support. In Washington, allies agreed a financial pledge of 40 billion euros of security assistance for this year. And we remain committed to this pledge. And I very much welcome recent announcements of more military aid by the US, Germany, Sweden, Estonia, Lithuania, Norway. This is great news. We are setting up our new NATO command in Wiesbaden to coordinate security assistance and training for Ukraine. This makes our support more steadfast and also sustainable. But we will all need to do more, especially now. The stronger our military support to Ukraine is now, the stronger their hand will be at the negotiating table. And the sooner we can end Russian aggression once and for all in Ukraine. Tomorrow, ministers will address Russia's hostile actions in NATO countries. Over the past years, Russia and also China have tried to destabilize our nations with acts of sabotage, cyber attacks and energy blackmail to intimidate us. None of these actions will deter us from supporting Ukraine or making our own defenses stronger. NATO allies will continue to stand together to face these threats through a range of measures, including greater intelligence sharing and better protection of our critical infrastructure. And with that, I'm ready to take your questions.
Thank you. We'll start with Reuters over there. Sabine.
Thank you. Secretary, Ukraine has been asking for a quick invitation to NATO. Will you issue such an invitation to NATO during this meeting, or will you at least strengthen the membership language on Ukraine's path to membership?
Well, as you know, allies agree that the future of Ukraine is in NATO, and during the Washington summit, we agreed on the irreversible path towards NATO, and before and after the Washington summit, allies have been working on building the bridge. And the bridge consists, for example, out of the individual bilateral security agreements between allies and Ukraine, but also the implementation of all the decisions being agreed in Washington. So this is happening step by step. But I would think that we have to concentrate, and we will concentrate over these next 2 days very much on what is necessary now. And what is necessary now is to make sure that military aid will go to Ukraine, because that is now crucial for them to, if they decide to do so, enter into talks with the Russians one day. They will do this from a position of strength.
Okay, I'll go to Ukraine News Agency, Dimitro, third row.
Thank you for the floor. Dmitro Shkuko, National News Agency of Ukraine. Right now we have some kind of narratives coming from the upcoming American administration on a peace plan for Ukraine, which is also about some kind of boots on the ground in Ukraine, involving some kind of European forces. Do you expect that ministers will consider that issue, and what kind of conditions are necessary to be kept for the presence of these troops in Ukraine? What kind of roles? Thanks.
The meeting in the next 2 days will very much concentrate on how to make sure that Ukraine, whenever it decides to enter into peace talks, will do so from a position of strength. And to get there, it is crucial that more military aid will be pumped into Ukraine. And therefore, I'm so happy that all the countries I just listed have announced military aid going into Ukraine, including many European allies, and of course also the United States. And I commend them for that. So that is the most crucial thing we have to do now. And from there, whenever the Ukrainian government would decide to enter into talks, and it's up to them to decide that, we want for them to do that from a position of strength. From there, it will be a step-by-step approach. So I'm not going to comment on every piece of news coming out of every ally, because I think we really should concentrate. And that is what we will do today and tomorrow, on making sure that Ukraine can start those talks from the best possible position.
Okay, Fats at the end there. Thank you. Thomas.
Thanks a lot. Thomas Gutschka, Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. 2 questions, please. The first one, have you discussed such plans like patrolling a demilitarized zone, for instance, in the future when you spoke to President Trump in Mar-a-Lago? And the second question related to China. There have been reports about delivery of drones, military drones, to Russia and their use on the battlefield. Have you seen conclusive evidence that such drones are actually used against Ukraine? Thank you.
On the second question, as you know, China is active in sanction circumvention, is active through dual-use goods they deliver into Russia, and therefore China, but also Iran and North Korea, they are all involved in Russia's full onslaught on Ukraine. And we are very not only worried about that, we condemn it. And then I come back to your first question, my discussions with the incoming president, with President Trump. Clearly, I cannot tell you what he said, but we very much focused the discussion on 3 issues. One, he was the one ramping up defense spending when he was president. And I, again, thanked him for that because that was crucial. But we need to do more. It will not be enough to stick at the 2%, because longer term, that means that our deterrence is not strong enough if we would stick to the 2%. Second, industry production. How do we get our defense industrial base to really put in extra shifts, put in extra production lines to ramp up the production? Because we know the Russians and the Chinese are doing that. And by the way, also the North Koreans. And thirdly, on Ukraine, my view on this is that when we discuss Ukraine, we should discuss the fact that Russia and China, you already mentioned, but also Iran and, of course, North Korea, they're all working together. And Russia is paying for this. For example, missile technology, which is then being used by the North Koreans to threaten not only us or the Republic of Korea, so South Korea and Japan, but also the US mainland. So this all is getting connected. So whenever we get to a deal on Ukraine, it has to be a good deal. Because what we can never have is high-fiving Kim Jong-uns and Xi Jinping and whoever else thinking that it is a bad deal. Because that might get other people think about what they could do. So this is crucial for our defense, not only here in Europe, but also the US, the Indo-Pacific and the Euro-Atlantic.
Thank you. We'll go to Independent Arabia over there.
Ethan Hari from Independent Arabia. So as China and Russia expand their influence in the Middle East, how do you envision the NATO role in the region, and do you plan to work with Gulf countries on this front? Thank you.
Well, as you know, we agreed that NATO needs to have strong relations, what we call the southern neighborhood. And that involves the Middle East, but also large parts of Africa. And we are working very actively on this. This is one of the reasons why His Majesty, the King of Jordan, is visiting today. As you also know, we are opening an office in Jordan. And we are very active on this because we cannot have a situation in which, and here I quote the Italian Prime Minister, that we have the Chinese and the Russians being involved in Africa and other parts of the region. And the West not being involved there. So NATO has to be active there, not by extending Article 5 or whatever, because the NATO is the transatlantic, the Euro-Atlantic defense community, but by being active there, by building bilateral relations, by helping out when that is necessary, like we are doing through the mission in Iraq, helping Iraq to build its national defense forces. So that is what we are doing, because we cannot let the Russians and the Chinese in Africa, but also in the Gulf. It is crucial that we have those strong relations. And here, the Jordan King, His Majesty King Abdullah, is really helpful for years now to steer us on that path with all his knowledge of the region.
Thank you. I'll take another question, this time from Mamlaka TV. Yep.
How is NATO coordinating?
With apologies to the new NATO Secretary General, we must leave it there. Mark Rutte, he was explaining to us about a Ukraine Council NATO working dinner later on this evening. An EU representative will also be there to talk about the aggression from Russia, which shows no sign of abating. Talked about North Korean soldiers being involved and Russian forces testing weapons in the Ukraine area, it would seem for now, with impunity. He said Ukraine has a right to defend itself and they need the support of NATO. He said, we are doing plenty, but we need to do more. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you, Stephen Fry. Thoughts on whether the UK should return the Elgin marbles.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent.
It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century.
I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
If there's anyone who might know how to fix Northern Ireland's devolved government, it's the American architect.
Changes in circumstance require changes in approach.
The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland.
I confirmed that I am willing to take up the office of First Minister. My election to the post of First Minister demonstrates the change that's happening on this island.
Catholics and Protestants on different sides, now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19 and end up in hospital, religion's nothing.
People here are adept at finding hope amid adversity. That's the spirit of a place that punches way above its weight. We help you understand the world with us. A toxic blue-green algae now poisoning Loch Ness. It's breaking your heart what has happened here.
It is.
This is a vital resource, a national treasure, now fighting for its very life. They are effectively surrounded by Northern Ireland, and that makes this the most unlikely of international frontiers.
If there's a hard border, I think it'll cripple the country.
Winter is coming. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. Sky News, the full story first.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. Just want to bring you the latest. You'll know that there is a sort of uneasy ceasefire between Hezbollah in southern Lebanon and Israel that came into place a couple of days ago. There has been one or two incursions since then, but we're just hearing that the Israeli military are telling us that it attacked a terrorist cell, in their words, in Lebanon's Aqaba area in the Bekaa Valley there. That, according to an Israeli military spokesperson, we can't tell you any more than that at this stage. So, as I said, very much an uneasy ceasefire, more or less holding at this stage, but there have been incursions on both sides as far as military rockets are concerned. We'll get more on that. We'll update you as soon as we can. Meantime, let's tell you about Downing Street hosting a group of talks today between Keir Starmer and also the Greek Prime Minister. The Elgin marbles are not on the agenda, but one would anticipate that they will be brought up anyway. A very famous face in the form of Stephen Fry. He's part of the Parthenon Project, which is another name for the Elgin marbles, the Parthenon marbles as they're called in Greece. He says it's time to send them back.
I tend to call them the Parthenon marbles. I think the piratical earl who lifted them out of Greece over 200 years ago probably doesn't deserve to have his name connected with them. But on a more serious note, yes, I have been dedicated, if that's the right word, to the mission of seeing if the marbles can be repatriated and placed where they belong back in Athens. I know there are have been all kinds of claims and counterclaims of legality and things that are, the deaccession, as they call it, the loss of an article is very difficult for a museum, and that there's an act of parliament and so on. But all of this can be overcome by willpower, and indeed acts of parliament in the past have meant that the Australian Constitution, the actual Constitution, the document, was in the British Museum, and an Act of Parliament had to be passed to return it, or give it to the country where it belonged, in Canberra, and it was like 5 minutes on the nod. These things are not impossible. And in a way, the comedy of it is it's so human. It's all down really to language. I suspect that what Kyrie Mitsotakis, the Greek Prime Minister who's visiting at the moment, and Sakir will be perhaps skirting around if they are talking about the subject, is the language. And that's the key. In a sense, it's a four-letter word, L-O-A-N. The British Museum wants it known that they are perhaps going to lend the marbles to Greece. And for Greece, that's really not an acceptable word because it's not accepting that they belong to Athens and to the Greek people.
What's the PM going to do?
It's interesting, isn't it? So the PM meeting the Greek leader today. Now, if you talk to Number 10, they say it's not on the agenda. It's not what they're going to be discussing. It's not what he's there for. Nothing to see here. And the government essentially say it's a question for the British Museum. It's not something that they want to be getting involved in. But the music, the mood music seems to be that they're not against it in theory, if it is agreed and everybody is happy with the agreement between the British Museum and the Greek
loan as opposed to
well, exactly
return.
That, yeah. But interestingly, even Mel Stride, Shadow Chancellor, when you were speaking to him, he was massively against it. He said he was against giving the sculptures or loaning the sculptures. And even when you put to him the idea of a loan rather than
wasn't having it,
permanently, no, he basically said, I don't think they'll give them back.
Yeah.
Doesn't trust the Greeks to give them back, which
That's because he's a guide at the British Museum, or he's trained to be a guide at the British Museum. What would he talk about if he can't talk about them? As far as Stephen Fry is concerned, he also spoke about what's happening with Gregg Wallace. He thinks he's a bit of a dinosaur. He didn't read the room. He should have known his audience. And we talked to Dorothy Byrne as well, didn't we?
Yeah, it was interesting hearing from Stephen Fry. He was referencing that apology video that came over the weekend from Gregg Wallace about his alleged conduct, saying that he should be more aware of his surroundings, in essence, and that banter like this shouldn't be aired. And he said it was a bit of a clash between generations at the moment now. Is that playing out? That's up to you to decide, really. But I think it's interesting what happens next, because we're into Christmas. Does MasterChef get pulled from the schedule? Some calling for that to happen. Some are saying, no, it shouldn't happen. We'll see. Let's see what Dorothy Byrne said, should we?
One woman complained he told the joke about rape. I mean, that is utterly unacceptable. There have been 3 reports that he actually touched women. A woman said that he constantly talked to her about his sex life. Another woman said that she was questioned about lesbian sex. This is really tantamount to harassment and bullying at work when women are subjected to embarrassing and humiliating behaviour like that from a man who has great power, because the presenter of a television programme has huge power.
He denies all of that, though, doesn't he?
He does deny all of that, and the investigation's ongoing. But it's 2024. It's so baffling that we're still having this conversation about men behaving and these allegations around their behaviour. And obviously, that video that he put out, he can't deny because it was put out. And again, that turn of phrase, again, baffling. And we had Gito Harry on earlier in the programme, didn't we? Who said, look, if he'd gone straight for the apology, this would be a lot easier for him. But that doesn't override the alleged behaviour that's gone on for years prior.
Let's see what happens. I think this story, as we say in the business, has still got legs.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that it will develop throughout the course of the day, and we will probably be talking about it again tomorrow. But let's talk about this now, this beautiful Christmas tree. Here we go, and we'll see you tomorrow.
4, 3, 2, 1. Yay! It worked. Nervous moment there, but it's all good.